Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We just want to give a few more people an opportunity to sign on, so we'll be right with you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I think we're going to get started here. So I want to say welcome. My name is Jen Rachman. I'm with Circle Surrogacy. And this evening, you're going to be joined by an expert panel of both professionals and parents through the program to talk about building your family through IVF and surrogacy. So just first, a little housekeeping. You're all in listen-only mode, which means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. However, if you have questions at any point in the webinar, you could type them in to the side panel, and at the end of the webinar, we will get to all of your questions. If for some reason you need to leave the webinar early, that's okay. You'll be sent a recording thereafter, and so if you don't get to hear your question answered, you could always go back and listen to the recording after we're done. So just to give you a heads up about who you're going to hear from tonight. So tonight's speakers, for the first part of our discussion, you're going to hear from 3 professionals in the field. You'll have Sam Hyde, President of Circle Surrogacy and Egg Donation. He'll be also joined by Dean Hutchison, the Vice President of Legal Services at Circle Surrogacy and Egg Donation, and Dr. Anate Brauer from Shady Fertility, based in New York City. After you hear from the panel of experts, you will get to hear some personal stories from 3 amazing women, 3 mothers through surrogacy that are going to be able to share their stories with you. You'll first hear from Leah DeFeo, who's parent through surrogacy and also started her own organization called Fly Bravely. You'll then hear from Cynara Charles Pierre. She's a mother through surrogacy after a very challenging experience herself, as well as Angela Salerni. She is a cancer survivor and mother through surrogacy as well. Here's a little bit of a glimpse of our agenda and who you're going to hear from. And again, at the end, you're going to have plenty of time. We're going to leave at least a half hour for Q&A, so we'll get to all of your questions at the end of the webinar. So now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Brauer from Shady Grove, who's going to give an overview of the IVF process. Hi, Dr. Brauer.
Hi, Jen. Hi, everybody.
I'm going to cue off.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to be here doing this with you tonight. Originally, this was supposed to be a live in-person event in our beautiful new waiting room at Shady Grove Fertility in New York. Unfortunately, other powers had other plans with COVID. So I hope you're all staying safe and well. And thank you so much for joining us on this webinar tonight. So tonight we're just gonna go over, basically I'll be going over the medical part. So, sorry, just having a little issue there. So I'll be going over kind of the general IVF process and the medical process of using a gestational carrier to build a family. And 1 second. Just having a problem with control over the slides. Jen, if it's easier, you can okay. I don't know if I have control now or not, but all right. So just a little bit of an introduction into Shady Grove Fertility. So Shady Grove Fertility is the largest fertility program in the country. We have about 61 physicians over 38 locations. New York is our newest region. So SGF started out way back in the early 90s in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area, eventually expanded to Pennsylvania, Georgia, Florida, Santiago, Chile. We also have programs, collaborations in Canada, the UK, and now we're in New York City. And my partner, Dr. Tomer Singer, and I started this practice in the fall. We have a beautiful 15,000 square foot space right on 60th and Park, and we feel very lucky to be part of this organization with amazing physicians, partners, research, and the ability to continue to provide surrogacy services to our patients, since currently surrogacy is still not legalized in New York. It will be, thank God, thanks to Cynara and Leah's efforts in part, but not until 2021. So until then, we're very lucky to be part of an organization which has labs in Pennsylvania and in Maryland, where we can still consider continue to offer these services to our patients. Next slide, please. So because of COVID, Shady Grove Fertility now offers virtual consults, which is a great, easy, convenient way to get together with your physician, come up with a plan of action, really from the comfort of your own home. So I hope that you all take advantage of this. Next slide. So let's talk about, kind of in a nutshell, the process of IVF using a gestational carrier. So it's first important to understand some definitions that I'll be using. So I'll be using the term IP a lot. IP stands for intended parents. And that is who will be, that is you. That is who will be who will be the biologic parents to this child. And GC stands for gestational carrier, which is our surrogate. So I kind of look at the journey in two steps, right? Step one is creating the embryo, which has to be done through IVF. And step two is finding the carrier and doing the transfer and hopefully following the pregnancy. So there's several steps that go into this, and I'll go over them briefly, but basically, obviously, consulting with your physician, having an evaluation, creating your embryos, then matching with a gestational carrier, undergoing specific screening for that carrier, having a follow-up consult with your physician, and planning for embryo transfer and ultimately pregnancy. Next slide. So the first step to all this is just having a consult with your physician and getting evaluated. So what do you really need to make a baby, right? You need normal ovaries with good quantity and quality of eggs, normal sperm, open fallopian tubes, and a normal uterus to implant. If the plan is to use a gestational carrier, then, then obviously the testing of the tubes in the uterus are not important in this case. But I do urge you to have a consult with a physician just to kind of go over all of this testing, because I'll tell you that a lot of women come to me specifically for surrogacy, and in review of all of their records, we see that maybe there is a chance they can carry on their own, and they thought they needed a surrogate, but they really don't. So I think it's really important to make sure you have all your baseline testing. So to look at the ovaries, with the ovaries, we worry about quantity and quality, right? So with quantity, we call that ovarian reserve, how many eggs you have left. And women are born with a certain subset of eggs, and we have the most eggs we'll ever have in our mom's uterus. We have 6 to 7 million eggs. By the time we're born, we have about 1 million eggs. By the time we hit puberty, we have about 300,000 eggs. And then every month, your brain recruits one egg to be the chosen one that's going to grow and ovulate. And once that grows, it suppresses the rest of that eggs that month to go away, to die off. So every month you're losing eggs. So there's baseline numbers you can look at to see where you are on that ovarian reserve spectrum. One of those numbers is called AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone. It's a hormone that's made by the small resting eggs in the ovaries. So the more eggs you have, the more AMH you make. And that's a really important quantitative number that helps me as a physician and you as a patient know how many eggs am I going to expect to retrieve if I go through IVF. It's purely quantitative. It doesn't give you chances of success in nature. Egg quality, which is directly linked to genetics of the eggs and your age, is what actually gives you chances of success. So as we get older, not only do we lose eggs, but the eggs retain age. They get more and more DNA mutations, which leads to an egg with a wrong number of chromosomes, which either won't fertilize, will fertilize and not implant, or will fertilize, implant, and lead to a miscarriage. And while there's no blood test we can do on you to tell you what the quality of your eggs are, we know from testing hundreds of thousands of embryos at different age groups that at 30, around half your embryos will be genetically abnormal. By 35, 36, it's about 55 to 60%. By 40, it's about 90%. So that's where the quality comes into play. Sperm, obviously, we can easily look at sperm with a semen analysis. A semen analysis looks for count, how many sperm there are, motility, how the tails are moving, and morphology, how the heads are shaped, because the heads have to be shaped a certain way and the tails moving a certain way in order to fertilize an egg. And in order to evaluate your uterus, which is actually also what we use for the carrier, which I'll talk about, generally we can do an HSG, a hysterosalpingogram, where you infuse dye going and you let it fill the uterus and spill out of the tubes, and you take X-ray pictures. And you can also do a saline sonogram where it's the same kind of an idea, but we just infuse saline into the uterine cavity and take 3D pictures of the uterus to make sure it's a perfect home for an embryo. So this is kind of like a basic infertility workup, and you should definitely at least have this workup before considering, next steps required, whether it's, low-tech treatments or whether it's IVF or whether it's IVF for use with a surrogate, and can also help evaluate whether or not you can use your own eggs. So some women do have a very low AMH, or they are, at an age where their own eggs may not work. And so for those patients, there's also excellent options with egg donation, which I'll touch on a little bit. Next slide. So you've had your consultation, you've kind of had your whole workup, you sit down with your physician, and then the next step is really creating the embryos, right? So you're either going to create embryos with your own eggs, that's an autologous cycle, you're using your own eggs, or with donor eggs. For tonight, I'll mostly focus on using your own eggs, but everything I talk about that you would be going through is exactly what a donor would be going through. So the process of IVF is the same, it's just whose egg are you going to use? Next slide. So in order to understand anything we do in fertility, you should just understand how like a regular cycle works, what happens every month, like in a textbook. So a regular cycle, I don't know if you can see my arrow here, but a regular cycle is divided into two halves. There's the first half, which is the follicular phase, which is while the egg is growing. And then there's the second half, which is the luteal phase, which is when the embryo can implant. So we all start the first day of a period with all these little resting follicles. Follicles are just sacs of fluid that house eggs, that house resting eggs. And your brain makes a hormone called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, that tells the ovary to grow an egg. And by the way, this is also a good marker of ovarian reserve, right? When you hear the words day 2 or 3 bloods, we're checking FSH on day 2 or 3 because it's a marker of how hard the brain has to work or how much FSH it has to make to tell the ovary to grow an egg. So if that number is very high, then that means your brain's kind of working overtime to grow an egg. So it means maybe you have a little bit of a lower reserve. So that's another marker of ovarian reserve. So your brain makes FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, that tells a follicle to grow. It only makes enough FSH to tell one follicle to grow. So that follicle grows. As it grows, the egg inside matures and it makes estrogen. And once it reaches peak maturity, it makes a peak level of estrogen that basically tells the brain to do 2 things. One, it tells the brain, stop making FSH. I have my egg for the month, brain. I don't need any more FSH. And then it cuts off the supply to the rest of these little guys and they die off. Then it tells the brain to do another thing. tells the brain to make LH, another hormone that's the surge that happens in the middle of the month. If you've ever used ovulation prediction kits, I call them insanity sticks. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for that surge, and that's what leads to final egg maturation and eventual ovulation. Once you've ovulated, which means the egg left the ovary, it can now meet a sperm. And now it's made an embryo, and your body makes another hormone called progesterone. And it's the progesterone that stabilizes the lining in the second half of the cycle to implant the embryo. So the egg matures, makes estrogen. The estrogen thickens the lining of the uterus. Now you ovulate. What's left over in the ovary makes now progesterone to stabilize the lining to implant an embryo. If you don't have an implantation, the progesterone goes away and you get a period. And that's what happens every month. Next slide. So just to review again, kind of natural conception, you have an ovulation, the egg ovulates into the fallopian tube, meets a sperm in the fallopian tube, they create an embryo, and that embryo travels down into the uterus and implants. Next slide. So what happens with IVF? What is IVF, right? So IVF, in vitro fertilization, means everything's happening outside of the body. So with IVF, we don't want your brain to talk to the ovary, right? So we don't want your brain to be making FSH. We give you FSH directly through injectable medication. And while your brain makes only a little bit of FSH every month to tell your ovary to grow one egg, we're giving it to you through medication, through small injections at a little bit of a higher dosage, with the goal of recruiting multiple follicles. So we want to recruit as many follicles as we can safely. And we monitor you over a period of 10 to 14 days with ultrasound and blood work, and we can actually see these follicles growing. And we know that when a follicle gets to be a certain size, the egg inside should be mature. So we trigger the final steps of egg maturation. But instead of letting you ovulate, we take you for an egg retrieval. Next slide. So this is kind of the idea of it. So this is in vivo on the left side of your screen, which is what happens in the body. And this is in vitro, which basically we're retrieving the egg and we're fertilizing it with sperm in a dish outside of the body. So that's why it's called in vitro. Next slide.
I wonder why it's not finding these.
Somebody's unmuted. Sorry. Okay. All right, so just to review again, so the first part of the process is that 10 to 14 days where we're giving you stimulation medication and we're bringing you in for ultrasound and blood work every 2 or 3 days, again, to measure the follicles growing. Next slide. And then that final injection is that trigger shot that leads to maturation of the egg, but instead of letting you ovulate, we're taking you for an egg retrieval, right? So an egg retrieval is about a 15-minute procedure. It's done under anesthesia. It's IV sedation, so you're not intubated or anything like that. It's like the anesthesia it's propofol, so you would get it for like a colonoscopy, for example. We use a transvaginal ultrasound probe with a needle guide at the end, and we suction out all the fluid from all the follicles, and within those follicles live the eggs. And the embryologist there is able to identify the eggs in the fluid and actually call out to me in real time how many eggs are being retrieved. So it's really kind of a cool procedure. There's 2 kind of trigger shots we give. So LH, the hormone that our body normally makes, there isn't LH that we can just give you. So we either give you an HCG trigger. HCG is a hormone of pregnancy, which the body perceives to be LH. So we either give you that, or we give you something called a Lupron trigger that makes your body make its own LH surge. So the medication that you're taking for stimulation is that FSH, the same stuff that your brain makes. And then what we give you for a trigger is either HCG or Lupron. Next slide. So this is kind of a picture of an egg retrieval. So we have this transvaginal ultrasound probe with the needle guide at the end. And I don't know if you can see it here, but this little white thing sticking into this sac of fluid, that follicle, is actually the retrieval needle that we can see it under ultrasound guidance. And we suction out all that fluid, and in that fluid live the egg. It's a really cool thing. Next slide. So now we have an egg that's been identified, and the next step is to fertilize it. There's two ways to fertilize eggs. There's natural insemination, whereby you put an egg in a droplet and you surround it by 50,000 sperm and let them do their thing. Or there's something called ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where you take a sperm, or the embryologist takes a sperm and injects it directly into the egg. Reasons for doing ICSI over conventional insemination is if there's a significant male factor, meaning decreased sperm count or motility or morphology, or if you're doing genetic testing of the embryos, which I'll talk about in a minute, we also do require ICSI for that. Next slide. So this is an example of ICSI. So the other slide was, you could see the egg in the middle with all the sperm kind of trying to get in there. This is ICSI, where the embryologist can just take one sperm and inject it into the egg. And the reason that this is important when it comes to IVF with PGS, pre-implantation genetic screening, which I'll talk about in a minute, that's the chromosomal testing, is that you don't want any extra DNA from any extra sperm left over on the egg when you're achieving fertilization, because it could throw off the testing of the chromosomes. Next slide. So now we culture the embryos. So now you have an egg that's been fertilized by a sperm, which technically is an embryo, right? And now you watch it for 5 to 7 days. Next slide. And so here in the first slide, you see an egg that's been fertilized by a sperm. You have a nucleus from the egg and a nucleus from the sperm. So now there's DNA from the sperm, DNA from the egg, and now it starts to divide. The goal is to get here. This last slide is called a blastocyst. A blastocyst has 2 cell layers. It has an inner cell mass that becomes a fetus and an outer cell layer that becomes the placenta. They're genetically equivalent 99% of the time. At this point, you kind of have 2 options. You either say, I'm going to freeze the embryos. This is for if you're using a carrier. I'm going to freeze the embryos just based on what they look like. So all the embryos get graded. They get a number grade for how expanded the blastocyst is. The inner cell mass gets a letter grade. The outer cell layer gets a letter grade. And then they're all frozen. And by the way, this whole process that I just described of IVF happens whether you're using a donor, so either the donor is going through this process, or you yourself are going through this process with your own autologous egg. So either way, it's really a very similar process with small nuances. So now you have this embryo. So you can either decide to freeze it, so now you have it in the freezer for your future carrier cycle, or you can decide to test it for its chromosomes, right? So the first description is just traditional IVF. You create the embryo, you freeze it on day 5, 6, or 7. Whenever it makes it to blast, we would only freeze the high quality blastocyst. Your second option is to do IVF with PGS. Next slide. Next slide. So basically, as I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about egg quality, even in a 30-year-old, around half your eggs and therefore embryos may be chromosomally abnormal. And you can't tell that just by looking at an embryo. So if you really, really want to know what the viability or what the potential of that embryo is, you have the option of doing something called IVF, or pre-implantation genetic screening, which means you can actually take some of these trophectoderm cells, the outer cell layer that becomes the placenta, freeze all the embryos, send the cells off for testing. You get a report back a week later with each embryo and its chromosomal complement. And now you know which one is normal, which one isn't, and which is the best embryo to transfer back into the carrier. Next slide. So that's the kind of global, general, quick and dirty process of IVF, right? Of course, every case is different, and there's lots of different protocols that we use, and every decision we make is kind of based on your specific case. So it's very individualized. If you're creating embryos, inclusive of the decision of whether or not to do PGS, in my patients who are using gestational carriers, my threshold for doing PGS on the embryos or testing the embryos for their chromosomes is much lower. And that's because the purpose of PGS is to decrease time to pregnancy, and to decrease miscarriage rate. And when you're talking about, not only going through the investment of IVF, but also going through the financial and emotional investment of using a gestational carrier, you want to try to maximize success rates. So decrease time to pregnancy, meaning get to that pregnancy, get to the right embryo sooner, and decrease miscarriage rates as much as possible, because now you're involving a third party. And so you want to do everything possible to try to minimize that time to a term delivery as much as you can. And PGS does help you accomplish that. So there are some nuances to creating embryos for transfer in a gestational carrier, and that's FDA testing, right? So the FDA deems that we do very specific testing on whoever's, quote, donating the egg or the sperm at very specific timelines. And this is mostly infectious disease testing, but it's required within 7 days of sperm collection and 30 days of egg collection. For the sperm collection, SGF does require a sperm freeze to make sure that you're not missing that 7-day window. If you can't miss that, you has to be the FDA testing done within that 7-day window. And the other reason for it is you're going to have hopefully multiple vials stored. So if you have to do, a whole other cycle and a whole other retrieval, you're not going to have to get retested. You're not going to have to redo your FDA testing. You already have that sperm in the freezer, and we know we got that timeline right within the 7-day window of doing the FDA testing. So it is a cost-saving measure as well for patients. Next slide. Okay, so now you've created your embryo. It's in the freezer. That's like a huge part of it, right? Like probably more than 50% is just getting that embryo in the freezer, whether you're using a donor egg or your own egg. You feel like, okay, I have my, potentially genetically tested embryo in the freezer. Every chromosomally normal embryo carries about a 60 to 65% success rate. So you feel good about that. It's in the freezer. Now it's time to find your carrier. Sometimes these things are happening kind of at the same time. You're preliminarily starting to look for a carrier, and the team at Circle can tell you a little bit more about what the best timing should be. So, but I look at it as 2 different steps. So now you're going to match with a carrier. So why use an agency, right? So there's a lot of different ways to find carriers. Some people want to find someone themselves. Some people just use a reproductive attorney, like outside of an agency. Most people use an agency. And I'll tell you, I'm currently in New York, but before joining Shady Grove in New York, I practiced in Connecticut for 7 years, where, we built a pretty robust gestational carrier program. And, 9 times out of 10, when people found carriers themselves and just enlisted the help of a reproductive attorney, things didn't go well. And that's because an agency, while it might be a little bit more expensive upfront, they kind of help guide you through everything, right? So through the match, finding medical insurance for the carrier, setting up outside monitoring for the carrier, working with your clinic coordinator to push records back and forth. I mean, there's so many things that go into this, which I'm sure Circle will go into. But for me, from a practitioner perspective, and I think also from a patient perspective, if you can use an agency, I would strongly recommend it. So, you meet with your agency, you talk about exactly what you're looking for, you get a feel for each other, and now you start kind of having these preliminary matches. So the first step, when you find someone that you think that you like, from a medical perspective, that's all I'm going to cover, is as a physician, I want to have a preliminary review of her medical records. So all of her prior deliveries, clearance from her OBGYN, all of her medical history, like anything. We want complete records on every delivery. And that's really important because you want to make sure you're not picking up any red flags. We want to make sure that they've had easy, uncomplicated deliveries, and no significant health problems. SGF does have some minimal requirements. We require that gestational carriers are under the age of 43. 43 is kind of where we cap it off. If they're between the ages of 40 and 43, we require MFM clearance, since this is an elective pregnancy. We want the BMI to be BMI's body mass index. We want it to be under 32, a maximum of 5 prior vaginal deliveries, and that's because we know that women with over 5 deliveries have a risk of postpartum hemorrhage, right? Grand multiples, we call them. maximum of 2 prior C-sections. And we also require psychological screening as part of a preliminary clearance. And I think that's really important because, and I believe Circle does do that. They do this preliminary site clearance. And that's really nice because by the time you get to me actually meeting your carrier, you want to make sure that you've done everything possible to try to make that final step kind of a slam dunk. So you want all of this work done for you kind of on the front end. Next slide, please. So now I've reviewed the carrier's medical records. I've seen her site clearance. You know, I make sure that she has kind of updated prenatal labs. Anything you can do before you actually investing in her flying to see me, I would definitely do up front, and Circle or whatever agency you're using can help you do that. So the next step is to have an actual in-person medical and psychological screening. So we call that the GC day. I'll talk about it in pre-COVID times because it's definitely going to be different now because a lot of things are going to be having to do virtually, right? So once your gestational care is preliminarily cleared, they come for an in-person consultation and evaluation. I meet with the carrier, I go through, or whoever the physician is, I go through, you know, a very detailed medical history, surgical history, you know, the same as I would do with you in a new patient consult. This is my opportunity to go over the process with her, to go over any risks with her, to see if she has any concerns. You know, I view myself as a physician, I'm not only the intended parent's advocate, but I'm also the carrier's advocate. So I'm a physician kind of for both parties. And I want to make sure, you know, the key to success here is that everyone's on the same page and that everyone feels safe and well cared for. So on this day, we also do a physical exam. We do all the prenatal blood work, all of the FDA blood work on the carrier and her partner. If she has a partner, we do require that the partner comes as well. Urine toxicology screening, all the infectious disease screening. We do a mock embryo transfer, right? So, and a saline sonogram, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, just to make sure it's a nice home for the embryo. The intended parents have an opportunity to meet with one of our reproductive psychologists, and then there's a group meeting with the reproductive psychologist with the GC and her partner, the intended parent or parents, and the psychologist. And this meeting's really important. You know, there's some clinics that don't require this. We do, and I required it in my last clinic as well. And I think this session is important because there's a lot of things that kind of come out. Like there's a lot of stories that you wouldn't even really think of, just to make sure you're all on the same page about some pretty sensitive topics like, you know, termination, or, you know, if you as an intended parent feel strongly about your carrier delivering in a hospital and, you know, not having a home birth, or making sure that the carrier is going to be compliant with, you know, if she, God forbid, there's an emergency on labor and delivery and she needs a C-section, make sure, you know, all of these kind of little things are really important. And sometimes we do pick up red flags in these sessions, but hopefully most of them can be resolved. And if they can't be, then it's good to know that before you move to actually doing an embryo transfer. The gestational carrier also will have a medication teach class on this day with one of the nurses. Next. Okay, so this is a mock embryo transfer, and basically we do all of our transfers under ultrasound guidance. We use a Wallace catheter that you can actually see under ultrasound, and so we don't want any surprises on the day of the transfer. So to avoid surprises, we do a mock embryo transfer where it's literally what it sounds like. It's a trial transfer. You're just taking a mock catheter, you're making sure you can easily pass it through the uterus. And we also do a saline sonogram where we infuse fluid into the uterus and take 3D pictures of the uterus to make sure it's the perfect home for your embryo. Next slide. We at SGF, we have a very open conversation with intended parents and carriers about what their wishes are as far as how many embryos to transfer. We strongly believe in elective single embryo transfer. We feel, not just we, but evidence shows that every fetus that you add just increases risk and doesn't necessarily increase pregnancy rate. And our goal at the end of the day is, you know, one healthy baby. twins pose risks to the carriers themselves, so increased risk of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, gestational diabetes, so diabetes of pregnancy, increases risk of C-sections, maternal hemorrhage, maternal death. And for the babies, it increases risk of preterm delivery, which can have long-term consequences. Even if you control for the gestational age at which a twin is born, they have a 12-fold higher risk of cerebral palsy, which is a pretty staggering number if you think about it. So I know that, a lot of intended parents want to strongly consider putting back 2 embryos because it's such a big investment, but the worst possible outcome is a severely preterm delivery with significant, lifelong issues. So we strongly recommend and elect a single embryo transfer. Next slide. So once we have all of the clearance, right, from a medical perspective, you move to, I think I missed, did we skip a couple slides? Can you back up 2 slides? Sorry. Back up one more. Back up one more. Oh, next slide. Sorry. Okay, that's okay. I think there's like something missing, but anyway. Okay, so now your carrier's been cleared medically, and now you moved, if your contracts aren't already cleared, you move to contract clearance. So you're cleared legally, you're cleared medically, and now you have a follow-up consult with your physician where you kind of map out the cycle. So your physician and your coordinator, you talk about timing of everything, and you set the cycle up. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, this is definitely missing a couple of slides. Oh no. Okay, that's okay. All right, that's okay. So I think a couple of slides were taken out, but so you have now you set up your cycle. So the carrier goes through a very specific protocol. So if you remember the original slide that I showed you of what happens in a natural cycle, so all we have to do with the carrier, we already have our embryos in the freezer. So we give her a medication called Lupron, which basically tells her brain not to talk to the ovary. We don't want her to grow a follicle, right? We don't want her to ovulate her own egg because we don't want her to accidentally get pregnant with her own egg, right? So we give her something called Lupron, which kind of shuts the brain down from talking to her ovary. And then we give her estrogen, usually orally. We give her estrogen to thicken the lining in that first half of the cycle to kind of prepare the lining of the uterus for transfer. And then we give her progesterone to stabilize the lining in the second half of the transfer. And we do the embryo transfer on the 6th day of progesterone. And embryo transfer is, about a 5-minute procedure. It does happen in our IVF OR. It does not require anesthesia. It's pretty quick. It's painless. We do it under ultrasound guidance. After the transfer, she rests in the recovery room for about 20 minutes or so, and then goes along her way. We do ask that our carriers just not fly out the same day and just, can hang around and just try to relax for about a day or so, and then can fly out thereafter. About 2 weeks later, she has a pregnancy test. You can go back to the last slide because now we're back on track. She has a pregnancy test. Your carrier will be for all of this monitoring, like for her lining checks and for the original pregnancy test and for the initial pregnancy ultrasounds. She will be set up with a local monitoring, wherever she lives. Like if she lives in New Hampshire, we set her up with a clinic, wherever she lives. And we will be putting in the orders for the monitoring, and then we'll be getting the results back. And so we follow her pregnancy hormone up. Eventually, she has a pregnancy ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy, and eventually she'll graduate to her OB. Next slide. So we get a lot of questions, obviously, about finances in IVF. Thankfully, many of my patients are covered by insurance. Next slide. So SGF participates in all major insurances. This is for the IVF part of it. Insurance doesn't usually cover a gestational carrier, but it could cover you creating your embryos, depending on your policy, depending on whether you're using your own eggs or donor eggs, et cetera. Next slide. And if you don't have insurance coverage at all, SGF does offer some pretty creative and helpful financial programs. We have something called Shared Help, which is an income-based discount programs. It's actually, you know, over 80% of our patients get some kind of discount, just, you know, if there is income need there. We also have a military discount program. We offer a very creative program, which I don't know of anywhere else, called the Shared Risk Program. And this is basically our 100% refund program, which can be applied to either autologous IVF or donor eggs with use of a gestational carrier in either respect. So to me, you know, especially if you're using donor eggs with a gestational carrier, which is such a huge investment, taking advantage of a guarantee program is absolutely priceless, where if you're not successful, you can actually get your money back, or if you withdraw from the program for the IVF piece of it. So I think that's really huge. And we also work with fertility financing. Next slide. So how do you get in touch with us? You can go to our website, you can interact with us on our social channels, or you can schedule a virtual consult. So thank you for your time. Had to go through that pretty quickly. If you have any questions, you can also always find us, you know, whether it's email or phone call or social, either follow Ask at Shady Grove Fertility or myself at Dr. Anate Brauer. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Brauer. That was fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Hyde. I'm the president here at Circle Surrogacy and one of the owners of the agency. I'm joined here by Dean Hutchison, our VP of Legal Services, and we'll give you kind of a quick overview here on how surrogacy works from a couple different dimensions, and then we'd love to jump into the parent panel and then some questions after that. So So the surrogacy process as a whole, you know, I think you got a flavor for it when you heard Dr. Brauer talk, but there's a lot of kind of ins and outs of it, a lot of what have yous. It's a fairly complex process. We've kind of tried to break it down on this page to a fairly simple level, and on the next page I'll go into a timeline. But you know, generally speaking, whether it's with Circle or with any agency you choose, the first process is really what we call a consultation. And so sitting down with a couple of professionals from the agency to talk through how that agency thinks about the surrogacy journey as a whole. And not every agency is exactly right, just like not every clinic is exactly right or exactly the same. And so you know, after a consultation, next step is really having a welcome meeting with the team once you've made your choice, you know, having a welcome meeting with your case manager. If you choose an agency like Circle that has attorneys in-house, at that time you'd also get a chance to meet your attorney that'll represent you throughout your journey. Next step after that, and this is one that can kind of fluctuate just depending on how you go about things, is a clinic choice. So a lot of parents choose their clinic before they choose their agency. There's no real kind of right or wrong way to do it. The important thing is, you know, early on in the process, you should have both your surrogacy agency and your clinic chosen before you go forward with the next stage there, which is an egg donor selection. And so, you know, Circle is an agency that has a lot of our own egg donors in-house. We have a great database of about 350 women who are looking to be egg donors. About half of those women have been egg donors in the past. So we've got a great group of new donors and a great group of experienced donors as well that we'd love to match you with if you're in need of egg donation. Soon after that, after you go through egg donation, you go through the retrieval process with your clinic. Soon after that, we look to match you with a surrogate. You know, Dr. Brauer gave you a little bit of a flavor for how that works. There's a lot of kind of complexity around that in terms of making sure we're finding the right match for you. Circle as an agency, we have about a 1% acceptance rate with the surrogate applications that we receive. So we're one of the more selective agencies out there, and we put a lot of pride in having a really great screening process. Once you're matched, next big stage is IVF. That's where the real heavy lifting for the clinic comes in a lot of cases. And you know, just to kind of give a call out. Dr. Brauer, we've worked with her for many years, and she does a fantastic job. So if you're in with a clinic like that, with a doctor like Dr. Brauer, we're very experienced kind of working together. And a lot of that sort of coordination will happen behind the scenes, right? We'll be talking with the clinic, making sure your surrogate is getting to the right place at the right time, understands kind of when to take the meds, how to take them, setting up kind of local monitoring appointments for her before she would travel to the clinic. And we have a lot of experience working with Dr. Brauer and her team, so we'd love to do that. I think we're all at least tangentially familiar with the next stage on this. That's pregnancy, right? 9 months, hopefully. Can't make that one go any faster. And that might seem like a stage where the agency and the clinic no longer really have any involvement. And that's not really actually the case. The clinic, I think, stays involved for a little while. It's always there to help answer questions and kind of coach you along. As the surrogate gets into her pregnancy a little bit, her kind of medical care will be handed off to her local OBGYN, but the surrogacy agency as a whole will stay involved all the way through the journey, helping to check in with the surrogate, check in with you, make sure everyone is feeling comfortable and supported during the journey. And then as the journey progresses and the pregnancy progresses to probably about the 25-week mark, that's where Dean and our lawyers really start to lean in to make sure we have all the parentage work prepared and ready to fire at the time of birth, which is the next stage. So parents will travel in advance of birth to be there with the surrogate at the time of birth in the hospital closest to her home. That's a pretty magical day, a pretty chaotic day in a lot of ways, because you're never quite sure how it's going to unfold. But we'll have coached you and we'll have coached the surrogate on kind of what to expect and how to set kind of appropriate expectations for that day. And then our support doesn't end once the baby's born. We'll stay with you for 3 to 6 months. I mean, really, as long as you need help, as long as you have questions that we can help answer. But we'll help really tie a bow on things at the end of the journey. The birth itself produces a lot of medical bills that we'll take from the surrogate. We'll help process all of those for you, so you don't have to worry about those, and the surrogate doesn't have to worry about them. And then we'll also kind of tie a bow on any legal work that's remaining for you. And that legal work will differ kind of state by state and couple by couple, just depending on what they need. But we'll walk you through that and make sure that at the end of the day, we have both names on your birth certificate, which is kind of the priority on things. And then you'll return home. Sometime after the birth, most parents usually choose to stay, anywhere from 3 to 10 days in the location of the birth, and then travel home. And then we'll hope to see you again in a year or two if you decide to have a sibling. So let's see kind of how that breaks down from a timing perspective as we flip here to the next page. So I think I've talked through most of the steps on this page, so we don't need to kind of go into an excruciating amount of detail. I think it's just important to talk through the timing on it. So that upfront stage, right? This is the stage where we're creating your embryos and we're looking for a surrogate. Most of the time, that's going to unfold over the course of somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 months. 3 months would be a little bit fast. Maybe if you had your own embryos already created, it would be about 3. But you can kind of nest those 2 stages together. If you don't have embryos yet, you can create your embryos while we're looking for a surrogate for you. And a lot of parents ask me, why does it take 5 months to find a surrogate? Why does it take 4 months to find a surrogate? I want to kind of get started right away. And there's a couple reasons for that. So first off, Circle will only present to you fully screened carriers. So we will have taken that surrogate through a really involved screening process, including a lot of the site screening that Dr. Brauer mentioned, so that when you finally see her profile, this is a woman who has passed kind of screen after screen internally. And we have our social workers in-house, we have our surrogate screeners in-house, so we have a lot of expertise in kind of the right way to do that. And frankly, it's hard to find good carriers. And as I said, our acceptance rate is about 1%. And could we have a 1-month matching time if we wanted to? Sure, we could. We would just have to lower our standards, and then we could match people a lot faster. Overall, we've voted over time that people appreciate the quality and the suitability of the carriers that we're able to bring. And so we're comfortable having kind of that 4 to 5 month match time. The second reason we have that long of a match time is we have a lot of parents that want to work with us. And so when you join, you go on a queue and you start to work your way up that queue. And that's a great time to create your embryos, kind of make sure you have all your ducks in a row from a clinic perspective. And once you have your embryos ready to go, we can match you there soon after. I think a lot of parents feel like once they match, let's get right away, let's do a transfer, let's get the surrogate to the clinic and transfer the next day. We have to pump the brakes a little bit. We have to put a good legal agreement in place, and we have to have the surrogate travel to the clinic to an in-person physical. That's the same thing that Dr. Brauer just mentioned, which is kind of that last big check on suitability to carry. And then we have to time the actual IVF transfer with her menstrual cycle and kind of clinic schedules and her schedule. And so from the time you match to the time you transfer usually takes about 2 to 3 months. So you can see kind of we're stacking up a couple time frames here at the beginning. Once you're pregnant, of course, that's about 9 months. Usually, we have fingers crossed. And then there's usually kind of a week or so of intense work, or a couple weeks worth of intense work right around the time of birth. So that average journey ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 months. Now, could it be faster? Yes, of course, it could be faster. It could also be longer, right? If you have a failed transfer or something like that, that adds timing to there. So I would try to kind of orient around a range of times and get kind of comfortable with the fact that there's a little bit of ambiguity in this process, but that the parties you have, a clinic like Shady Grove and a doctor like Dr. Brauer, who's done this for a long time, and an agency like Circle, who's had 2,300 babies born through our process, we're all pulling in the same direction. So while there might be ambiguity and there might be a bump in the road, we all have our measure of success is the same, right? We want to get you to the finish line, and we're going to do everything we can to do that. So let's talk about kind of some of the characteristics of an agency, if we can flip to the next page. So yeah, I think this is a fairly accurate title as I see the agency landscape. I think we have some of the highest levels of parent support out there. Over time, as an agency, we have voted to bring our services in-house relative to outsourcing to third-party counsel, or outsourcing to social workers, or outsourcing escrow management, or medical billing, or local monitoring, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because over time, we found that having expertise in-house allows us to coordinate smoother journeys, right? And so you can kind of read through all the lists of things that we do here, but the general message that I would give is, as an agency, our goal is to get the highest proportion of people that sign on with us to the finish line, to go home with a baby. And we are exceedingly good at getting people to the finish line. But we do not solve for trying to have the absolute fastest journey of all time. Otherwise, I would have lower standards for surrogates. We take many more surrogates than we match you in a day. We also don't try to optimize for having the absolute lowest cost possible. Otherwise, we couldn't build in some of the expertise that we have. And so our only goal is to get people to the finish line, and we do everything we can to build our programs to make sure that that is what we achieve. So let's flip to the next page and we can dive in. I think a little bit of cost stuff is next. So Dean, let me hand that off to you now and take it from here.
Thanks, Sam. So just a quick introduction on myself. So I'm Dean Hutchison. As Jen mentioned earlier, I'm the Vice President in charge of legal services at Circle. And I've been with Circle now 16 years as of next month. So I started right out of law school working for our founder, John Weltman, who had both his children through surrogacy now 24 and 25 years ago, I think it is. So I spent the bulk of my career, if not the majority of my career, all of it, my career in this field. And outside of Circle, I actually chair the American Bar Association's Assisted Reproductive Technology Law Committee. So I've stayed not only involved in this practice in my own professional life, but outside I've helped others setting up educational materials, conferences, et cetera. So I'm going to talk a little bit about costs. I'm going to talk a little bit about legal and how that comes into it. So at Circle, we really, over the last 5 years have developed programs to not only protect our parents from high costs, but also, just as Sam mentioned, get as many people through the process as possible. We used to have a different sort of program where you could kind of take on all the risk yourself, and then you could also add in a program where Circle would fix things and it would be a little more. And we decided, most people, when realizing the benefits of the fixed program, would rather be in a program where they know, all right, I've paid my amount, no matter how perfect or how many bumps I have, I'm not paying anything extra. So we have a 2-track program at Circle. We have one called the fixed cost, which is basically you're paying one set fee. It'll differ a little depending on your surrogate's actual base fee and your donor, if you need a donor, your donor's actual base fee. But basically, you pay that amount over the course of the first 4 to 8 months as you going through the matching process, et cetera. And if you have a transfer and you're successful with that transfer and a pregnancy that results in a child you bring home, you're not paying anything else other than your own travel costs, potential medical costs for the baby at the hospital, and your IVF costs. So you set that amount, you're done, and you're not paying anything else. If you do have an issue or a miscarriage, a failed transfer, or just something comes up where you need a rematch with a surrogate, you're going to pay just a flat amount to get to the next transfer, a small amount, and continue on. So it's a little bit of a take on a risk approach, but it's usually an amount that's less than what it would have cost to get to that next transfer. We also, on top of that, we have a journey protection guarantee program where for that same extra cost, it's $10,000, you pay it up front and you only pay it once, and that gives you either unlimited matching with donors and surrogates until you have a child home with you, or if you get to 5 embryo transfers and you're unsuccessful to that stage and you don't bring home a live child, you get your agency fees back plus whatever potential third-party costs are still in your account. So if you don't want to continue on in the process and you want to be done, you don't have to. You can instead take money back. So much like what Dr. Brauer was saying, where they have a money back program, we do as well. So you can cap all of your costs, both from an IVF and surrogacy perspective, to know, you're done. And I tell a lot of people, in terms of the most perfect journey, you're probably going to pay a little more to be with an agency like Circle or have a medical program like Shady Grove in terms of the protection guarantee type program, but you're never going to pay the huge amounts that can happen in a journey. If you have a miscarriage or something, there may be $30,000, $40,000 associated with a miscarriage in terms of insurance, in terms of lost fees. Here you paid one set fee and Circle's taking on that risk for you. You can go to the next slide. So the other thing that we were excited to launch this year, it seems like forever ago, pre-COVID, but it was in February where we launched a financing program with a partner, Origin Finance LLC. It's exclusive to Circle, and it's for about 13 states, including New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. And basically, it allows parents to apply for this loan. It's a $65,000 loan payable over 3 or 6 year terms. It's funded after you match with a surrogate, so there'll be some money up front to start the process to get to matching. And then when you match, it'll be funded right into your escrow account. You can start paying immediately. There's no prepayment issue, so you could, if you have money available but you want to keep some liquid, you can use this. And if you want to pay it off before the 3 or 6 year term, you can. And it's just a way just to make the process easier. Obviously, in these times, some people want to keep more cash liquid and don't want to take put all their money up front, but this gives them that opportunity to get funded at match and then not have to worry about that $65,000. So we've already had a bunch of people starting the application process, and we're hoping to help many people through the process through it. You can go to the next one, Jen. So the last thing I'll talk about is the legal process of a surrogacy. Now with Circle, as Sam mentioned, we're full service. We actually we grew out of a law firm. I didn't really go through our beginnings, but John, who had started Circle after he had his children through surrogacy, was a litigation attorney first. So I spent my first 6 years working both as a litigation attorney and helping Circle. And really, when John separated Circle from that law firm, when Circle really began to consume his professional life, he took a chunk of the law firm with him. And as we've grown, we've added to that legal team. So we have really 9 attorneys on staff, 5 of which handle the day-to-day activities of our parents. But from your kind of team approach, you'll have 1 attorney who's part of your team. So there's going to be 1 person in the legal department you're working with. We meet weekly as a team. We meet really daily and talk over cases all the time. So even though you have 1 attorney, we're still working together. The most important part of the law, or the most important law usually is the law where the surrogate is delivering. So that's usually the law that's going to determine parentage rights. It's going to determine what the birth certificate looks like, et cetera. So we're usually looking at that law. And we don't take surrogates from states where you can't do surrogacy. So, currently New York is on that list, but as we've heard earlier, that won't be the case as of February. So really it's Louisiana, Michigan, and Nebraska where we stay out of. And then certain states may have intricacies that don't work with certain couples, but we match accordingly to what works for you. The big benefits to this New York law, which we've touched on, are not only that surrogacy is allowed there, but probably even bigger than that is that New York couples forever, as Dr. Brauer mentioned earlier, could create their embryos and fall in love with their doctor and fall in love with their clinic in New York, but then when they needed a surrogate would have to ship their embryos to a different clinic. And places like Shady Grove have labs and facilities all throughout the country, but it's still not your doctor. So this is great. As of February, New York clinics will be able to be doing transfers regardless of where the surrogate lives. So from the legal process, really, you're going to get matched with a surrogate, and we're going to take into impact all the things that matter to you, what you're looking for, what the birth certificate should look like, what the legal work should look like. And then you're going to have a contract with your surrogate and your egg donor if you have one. Your circle attorney will help you draft and negotiate on your behalf, and the surrogate and or the donor will have their own independent legal representation throughout the process. They're pretty simple negotiations. There will be some back and forth, but it's usually not an adversarial bang on the table thing. It's more of a little change here and there that takes a couple days. So give yourself about 3 to 5 weeks to get through that contract stage. And then really where legal gets back involved, again, in your case, is after a pregnancy, and that's when we're helping to establish your parentage rights, as Sam had mentioned. And we're licensed in a bunch of states where we do the legal work, or we're working with a local attorney on the ground and managing them and getting your parentage rights fully secure. We want to make sure, obviously that's the most important part, is that your parentage rights are as secure as possible through matching you properly, doing the contracts properly, and doing the legal work. But we also want to make a sense of the pregnancy as your pregnancy, so that you're having decision rights immediately upon birth. If issues happen during the pregnancy, you can get second opinions, et cetera. So we want to make you feel as comfortable as possible, even though someone else is carrying your child hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. We want you to be as involved as can be. I'm going to go to the next slide, Jen. So what makes Circle stand out? And I'll say a little piece, and Sam may want to jump in too. But as we've already touched on some of these things, that we're a full service agency, that everything is in house when issues arise, and you can go back a couple weeks that where I've seen probably the biggest team interaction in our history was when really we have a lot of international clients on top of our domestic clients, and our domestic clients are facing issues with COVID as well. But I mean, we had a team meeting right away where we went into overdrive, and between March and currently we've had probably 30 plus births where every parent from overseas was able to get here either prior to or immediately thereafter, from a team working with State Department officials, working with embassies, and then where there were issues with hospitals letting parents in or not letting parents in, our team was fully involved with helping find a way to get parents into the delivery room or get them into there as a caretaker for the child, et cetera. So when I hear the stories throughout the industry, I happen to help with some webinars for professional support group throughout, and a lot of people are lost, and a lot of attorneys who aren't attached to agencies were being asked to do things outside of their scope because the agencies just didn't have an internal team to help out. So I think that really made us, always has made us stand out, but especially in these times. I think, down the bottom, one thing I always talk about is that we're not just professionals, we're not just lawyers, we're not just social workers, but we're made up a lot of parents, a lot of surrogates, a lot of former egg donors. So when we're thinking about processes and how we can make different changes, we have a mindset from all different players in this field that have gone through this process to kind of guide where our decisions are being made, et cetera. Everything else is we've kind of touched on, but we have a really high success rate working with great IVF clinics and finding great surrogates for intended parents, and these different fixed cost programs to help people get through, knowing that they're not going to have to pay anything. They're not going to face some huge, daunting extra cost along the way.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dina. So thank you. I think the only point that I would have, and we can flip to the next page actually, and I can kind of talk through it here, is, for us at this stage, like I think as Dean touched on, we have a lot of professional expertise within our agency. I think Dean sells his own expertise a little bit short. I mean, he's literally one of kind of the best surrogacy lawyers on the planet, if not the best surrogacy lawyer on the planet. And we have that type of expertise across the agency. And our goal at the consultation stage is we really just want to make sure you're making an informed choice, right? I know we do a great job, but I'm not so arrogant to think that Circle is the best agency for every single person out there, right? But I do think that there's probably a subset of 2 to 3, 4 agencies maybe, across the US that are kind of head and shoulders above the rest, and I'd put Circle in that group, obviously. And so we just want you to feel like you're making an informed choice about the path forward. So we're always happy to kind of dive in and help compare and contrast and think through the different options for you. At the end of the day, like our goal is we just want to see you have a baby, right? We'd love to be part of that. But outside of being part of that, we still want you to go home with the baby. And so we want to do anything we can to help that along. So you can see some contact information for Lauren here. Lauren is our great kind of parent rep that meets with a lot of parents at the beginning of their journey just to have a quick 15-minute conversation, so she can help match you with the right person to do a consult with. Some people have more legal questions, so they want to meet with Dean. Some people have more process questions, so maybe they want to meet with Jen Rachman, who presented earlier. And we just want to help kind of match you with the right person so you can make an informed choice about how you start your family. So the email's there. You can also look at our website and come through that way as well. So we'd love to support you if it's right. We'd obviously love to work with Dr. Brauer on your journey together. I know that we've had a lot of success with our journeys together in the past, so we'd love to help you along with that. I think we're going to go to the parent panel now, right? So I think we go to the next page. I think it's Jen. Are you taking the reins on this one? You're on mute, I think. You're definitely on mute.
I'm on mute.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. That was great. Yes. So next up is our patient panel. So we're going to have wonderful stories from 3 amazing women. So I would like to first let me quickly reintroduce myself. So I'm Jen Rachman with Circle Surrogacy. I am Circle's New York point person. So I'm located here in New York City. I'm a social worker with the agency, and I'm also a parent through the program. As Dean said, many of us have personal stories, and I, like the women you're about to hear from, am a parent through surrogacy and egg donation as well. So I'm always here to support you, provide you with information as a local resource. So now let's get started and talk to these amazing women. I'm gonna call Leah DeFeo first to share her story with you. Leah, you there? Hi. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, happy to be here.
So I had the privilege of meeting Leah when she first started her surrogacy journey, and I do want to say that your story still takes my breath away, because I feel like you came into this process having had a lot of challenges and difficulties behind you, and then you came into this experience, and just your story is one that just makes me just go wow, because what a beautiful ending, but a lot of different steps and stages to get there. So thank you for being here to share your story with us. Now, I like to go back to the beginning of trying to create your family. And can you talk and share with the group what brought you to surrogacy in the first place? Because everyone comes with a story, right? Everyone has an experience that led them to this path. And so would you mind start by sharing yours?
Of course, yeah. I think for many women who choose surrogacy, it's kind of the end of a very long road, even though it's the beginning of a new road. For myself and my husband, we had a hard time getting pregnant. We went through 3 IUIs, which are fertility treatments, intrauterine inseminations, in order to conceive our son. And my pregnancy ended tragically at 31 weeks. My son was stillborn. My uterus had ruptured, which was completely unexpected. I was grateful to be alive, but I was told I could never carry again. So I actually, funny enough, from my hospital bed called Angela, who's one of the other panelists and who you'll hear from later, because Angela is a dear friend. I've known her since kindergarten, and she went through surrogacy. She was somebody I knew that actually went through this process. So I knew it was an option, and I knew that I needed to learn more right then and there, and understand it. So surrogacy, I got there because I really wanted my own biological child, and wasn't able to carry.
So here you are, you have this friend from your, that you've known all this time, and you look into her and say, wow, I know someone that's done this before and I need to learn more. How did you start gathering information? What kind of steps did you take to get yourself mentally, emotionally prepared for taking that step?
So at the point when we were considering this, I felt like, oh my gosh, we are so far behind. We were supposed to be meeting our baby, and now we have to start over. So Angela is one of two women in my life who I knew. The other is my cousin Liz, who is a cancer survivor and is also used Circle. So these are two women that I trust, and I wanted to move very quickly. So I really just got information on their two processes. And I know from the work I do now with Fly Bravely that surrogacy is very intimidating. It's hard to know. How do you start? Where do you start? Do you start with a clinic? Do you start with an agency? And I had these two women, and I felt so privileged to be able to say to them, how do I do that and get the information? And because I trusted them, I interviewed both of their agencies. And ultimately chose Circle and to move forward with Circle. So, and through Circle, they introduced me to a woman who had recently welcomed a child via surrogate. And that woman actually introduced me to the fertility clinic and made that recommendation. When I went through this process, we had a clinic in New York where we had done the IUIs, and we called them to say we were now doing surrogacy, and they literally hung up on us. They were like, we cannot work with you. We will not work with you. So we wound up going to Connecticut for our treatments. That's where I met Dr. Brauer. And at the end of the day, I was actually so much happier there because the clinic was very personal, and I had a lot of personal attention, which I didn't feel at the time in the clinic I was using in New York.
Yeah, it's such a, before the law of surrogacy changing in New York, intended parents had to step out of the city to do the medical process, right? And many folks in the tri-state area went into Connecticut because Connecticut has been a surrogacy-friendly state for some time. So that transition is like, it's hard enough because now it's like I have to find another provider. So now here you are, you've had a series of steps already. I'm glad you had connections. It's helpful to have resources and people to point you in direction, and people that you trust especially. Can you talk a little bit about the early stages of your surrogacy? Because now you come into this process and you're looking for this woman, right? The woman who's going to help you become a parent and help you navigate this process and this relationship. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you were looking for in a match and what that first match was like?
Yes, so I would say that between Angela and Liz, and also with Circle, they really helped us to, even before we spoke to our surrogate, think about the things that were important to us. Really identify, what we wanted in somebody that was going to carry our child. And for us, it was really important, obviously, that that woman had a very good medical background and experience with pregnancy, and also support. We wanted somebody that had a lot of emotional support in their life and somebody that could manage our baggage. I mean, we knew we were going in with a lot of anxieties. So we wrote a letter to our surrogate, as Circle suggests that you do. And in it, we were really honest, and we really laid out, how badly we wanted to be parents, and also the anxieties and what we were worried about. And I think that really set the tone for us. And when we were first matched with our surrogate, it felt really natural. Like, it felt like a really, really good fit. And I think a lot of it was that she wrote us a letter, we wrote her a letter, but we really we were also very open-minded. We didn't have a specific like type of person or type of, family structure that we wanted in our surrogate. We just wanted her to have the right support at home.
Wonderful. So you matched with Catherine, and now you're moving into the IVF phase, trying to get her pregnant, which I know brings a lot of anxiety. It's an intense period, right? You just met this woman, and now you're trying to work to help her get pregnant. Can you talk through, I know a big decision is how many embryos to implant. Can you talk a little about what that part of the process was like for you guys?
Yeah, so we only wanted one baby. That's all we ever wanted with even ourselves, and not even getting into surrogacy. So there actually wasn't a question at all about how many embryos. We knew that number was going to be one. I think for us, I was almost 40 when we started our first, IVF cycle, and that was very challenging. I had just been through a lot of trauma with my body, with our rupture, and the actual IVF process was emotional and challenging for me, and I felt just a lot of pressure that I put on myself about wanting to move forward and wanting it to be successful. And we did have to go through multiple IVF cycles in order to create actually one embryo. So after multiple cycles, we only had one embryo, and it does only take one good embryo, but we only had one. So Catherine was really patient with us in terms of, as we were going through the process. Our clinic, and I think anyone that's thinking about what clinic they're going to go to, for me, one of the most important factors was access. And I had the nurse's cell phone number and could call her and ask her any question anytime. So, that was really important to us. And at the end of the day, it took many rounds to create an embryo, but we were successful in our first transfer, which was amazing.
Amazing. That's wonderful. And I'm sure at that point you kind of feel like it's a milestone you hit and you go, okay, she's pregnant. And then some people think like I get through the first trimester and I'm gonna, hopefully things will continue to go well. Can you tell us a bit about the pregnancy and what your relationship with Catherine was like during that phase?
Yeah, we had a fantastic relationship. We spoke to each other every week. We Skyped every Sunday night with her and her husband, and her kids would pop in and say hi, and her dogs would pop in and say hi. But it was really every single week we would speak to her. I'll be honest, at first it was kind of awkward because like I don't talk to my brothers every week. I don't talk to my family every week at all, of my friends. So at first it's kind of really figuring out what to talk to, and because there's in pregnancy, there's not updates all the time, every week.
Right.
So but we really built a beautiful relationship. She came out for the medical screening with her mom. She came out for the transfer with her dad. And then we went out there for the 20-week ultrasound. And that was great. We really got to know her family. She volunteered at a farm, and they did this harvest festival every year, and she invited us to the harvest festival to meet her friends, and she was so proud and walking around with her big belly and telling everybody that, it was our baby in her belly, and it was really, really, really sweet. So it was and still is a really great relationship.
You guys are still in contact with one another. And so
yeah.
I love it. I love it. So now here we are, you're getting closer and closer to birth. And I feel like there's a transition that happens as people start, they're looking forward obviously to the birth of their child, and you start having those plans and conversations. And then tell us about the birth of your daughter, because I think that this is where I think this is where my breath got taken away. Like not what you would expect, especially after the loss that you have already had.
Yeah, so for us, I could not relax during the pregnancy. I was always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was super nervous because of what had happened. And my uterus ruptured at 31 weeks. And that was kind of the marker I kind of needed to mentally get past in order to feel like we were in a good place. All our doctor's appointments, everything was going incredibly. But, now I tell everyone, pregnancy in general, but surrogacy is not a guarantee of having a baby. Mm-hmm. So we got a call at 27 weeks. We had FaceTimed into every appointment, and we had an appointment, and the FaceTime wasn't coming. And I was texting and I wasn't getting answers. And It turns out they found an irregular heartbeat in the fetus, and they called us to say we had to get to, our surrogate was in Kentucky, and we had to get there as soon as possible. And we dropped everything and got on a plane. And the next 2 weeks were probably the hardest 2 weeks of my life. My husband and I essentially lived in the hospital with Catherine, and we tried to save our daughter's life. We had to really just try to navigate a lot. During those 2 weeks, I was unbelievably grateful that, I didn't mention this previously, but my husband and I had been seeing a grief therapist, and we had that support. And we also had the support of Circle, both from the legal perspective to make sure that the hospital spoke to us as the intended parents, and also because Circle had a social worker that would literally get on the phone with us at 10 o'clock at night, because there were hard conversations that we had to have about this with our surrogate, very hard conversations. And at the end of the day, we couldn't save our daughter, and she was born at 29 weeks with an incurable heart condition, and she passed away a couple of hours later. And it was devastating for us, but it was complicated because it was devastating for our surrogate too. She got into this to make it better for us and to give us this family. So it's very, very hard all around.
Very hard. And you're right, there's this complexity when you have this other person, right? So you're not only managing your own grief and your own loss, but you then also have to support and each other, so it just adds this layer of complexity. So you're in Kentucky and using the supports that are around you and taking care of your surrogate. What was this like for you and your husband to be able to move beyond this? Because I think there are a lot of people that would say, oh my gosh, I've had 2 significant losses. I don't know how much more I can persevere and push forward. How were you able to transition to continue to move forward?
We were that couple that said, we're done. We can't do this anymore. This isn't going to work. And I credit my husband, who after 2 months looked at me and said, this isn't you. You're not happy. You've always wanted to have your own baby. I have a stepdaughter and she's amazing. And we said, you know what? We're just going to be a family of 3. And that's what we're going to do. And he looked at me and said, this is not gonna, you're not gonna be happy. Like, we have to try again. And it turns out the job that I was at the time had IVF benefits. I called Circle and I said, what can you do for me? I called my clinic. I said, what can you do for me? And both places were unbelievably generous in adjusting. At the time, these guarantee programs didn't exist. So both companies were amazing at, really working with us on the economics. And because we had this IVF coverage, we said, you know what, we're going to try it. We're going to do 1 more round of IVF. And if it works and we create an embryo, then that's like a sign from the universe. And if we do it and it doesn't, we can look each other in the eye and said, we just did everything. And unbelievably, on the first round of IVF, we created an embryo that ultimately became our daughter.
Ultimately became your daughter. I can't even imagine how much that must have felt. And so moving into another match, right? When you match with Marissa, what was that like then to try to open yourself up to another connection with another woman, knowing that, risks are high and and there's a lot riding on it. What was that like for you guys?
Yeah. Marissa, actually, like Catherine, was a second-time surrogate. So she had experience. And I think that Circle really matched us with somebody that was a really good fit for us. Marissa was incredibly laid back. She was very much like, I'll do anything that you guys need, whatever makes you as comfortable as you want to be. She just was a really good fit for where we were. She is very spiritual and very much kind of believed in that this journey was going to kind of work for us in the most amazing way. Her husband was incredibly supportive. It was just, they were a really good fit for us. We were a very difficult, partner to be working with because we've had so much loss, and she really understood that. I had to really emotionally kind of distance myself from the pregnancy, and we told her that up front. We didn't speak to her every week. We spoke to her like twice a month. I speak to her more now than we did then. I just needed to distance myself, and she understood that based on what we had been through.
So she was able to respect your space and the space that you needed, but you communicated that with her. You talked about
We did. Yeah, we
what you
spoke
needed at that
all the
time.
time. Oh, it was very clear up front, what we needed. Yes, for sure. That was, I think that's the key to it, just making sure in the beginning you're talking about it and setting up the right expectations.
Got it. Got it. So now here you are, you're crossing thresholds in this next surrogacy and you're, moving past, I can't imagine what it felt like to pass 29, 31 weeks and you're progressing toward birth. And I don't know until you held your daughter. I don't know if did you relax? Were you able to
No.
relax?
We
No.
didn't. And we actually went to therapy every other week. My husband and I had a grief therapist that we worked with who specialized in loss. I don't think we could have survived, honestly, like emotionally gotten through it as well as we did if we weren't together going to see this woman. We saw her every other week, and it really gave us the support we needed during that time. So yeah, I didn't feel like I could breathe. We got to Marissa's in Utah, and she had always had her births like right around the due date. So we got out there about a week early because we did not want to miss it. And the doctors were telling us like, it's not anytime soon, come out a week early, you'll be fine. And being out a week early was one of the best decisions we made because it gave us time to decompress from our kind of busy New York lives and work. It gave us time to meet her extended family, spend time with her kids, go to dinners with her. And that part of the country just happens to be gorgeous. So we were able to kind of get out in nature and, relax a little bit and really think about what was to come. And we were able to, be there. We got the call at 4:30 in the morning and her water broke, and we got out from our hotel and ran to the hospital and were able to be there for the whole thing.
I can only imagine. I'm so glad you took that time. I think going in, if you have the ability to do that, to go into birth with that relaxed mindset is so different than all that, hustle that some people can feel. And so your daughter's born, Carolina's here. And so what was that like for you to meet her, to come home with her after all the
Amazing
challenges that you faced?
Yeah, it felt surreal. We didn't know if she was a boy or a girl. We kept that a secret. We thought that was part of the excitement. And, she came out, she was a girl, and we were in the room with Marissa, and, the doctors, and saw and Marissa was such a champ. She made it look so easy. And, we finally, after a little bit of time, Marissa was in her room recovering, and we were in a separate room, with our daughter. And my husband and I remember we both looked over the bassinet and we looked up, and he said to me, "I'm so glad we didn't give up." And I was like, wait, I was just going to say that. Like, it felt like it was just really incredible. It was such a great feeling. And we were so, so grateful that we didn't give up, and she was there and she was healthy, and, everything was okay. It felt incredible.
So what advice do you have for this group listening tonight who might be in different places in terms of their emotional readiness, or if they know they need a surrogate or don't know, what advice in hindsight would you give to those starting off?
I think just don't give up hope. Always believe that it's going to happen, but be prepared for the unexpected. So I think that having an emotional support system is so important. Understand who's going to hold space for you if things don't go exactly as you want, because pregnancy is not a straight line, and they're blips and they're things, even if it's not as tragic as what happened to us, there's still challenges with pregnancy, especially with, all the parties involved. It takes a village to have a baby arrive via surrogate. And I would also say that a lot of couples save and save and save for surrogacy because it is so expensive. But also know where your economic backup plan is, because sometimes the costs are more than you anticipate. So if you don't have that money, who could you turn to, or where could you get it if you really needed to? And just most of all, don't give up and be brave, because it takes a lot of bravery to do this.
Be brave. So tell us about your organization that you created called Fly Bravely, because that, that title just is perfect for what you've experienced.
Yeah, I think our daughter, who we lost, her name is Evelina, which is little bird. So that's kind of the fly is part of Fly Bravely. I started this organization because I felt so grateful to have women in my life that I could turn to at the start of my process and say, how does this work? And so many people don't. And the thing that gives me so much joy is being able to meet couples that are in the beginning of this journey and help them really understand the process from a totally neutral third-party point of view. I think a lot of couples will meet with an agency or meet with a clinic and feel like maybe pressured or biased because they're also collecting money, right? And so I think just being able to say, there's many different agencies out there, and I think, it was alluded to earlier, there's a few that are really above the fray and that are really fantastic, and understanding what those are and how they differ and what the clinic looks like, what the process looks like from start to finish, how long it takes. And most of all, for couples, helping them get on the same page about it emotionally. So my company coaches couples through surrogacy. I also run a support group and help those who are dealing with infertility and in the middle of their infertility cycle. And as you mentioned earlier, I do advocacy work around most recently legalizing surrogacy in New York. So thank you.
Thank you for doing that. It made a big difference. Super excited for what the future holds for our New York-based surrogates and intended parents. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Leah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad that you're here. So hang out because we might have some questions for you at the end, but I'm going to chime in Cynara's. Maybe if you guys want to switch places. Cynara, are you there? Hi. Thanks for joining us tonight. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Can you unmute yourself? No, hang on a second. Let me make sure that we can hear you. Oh, good. Hey, there we're good. Excellent. So thank you for joining us tonight. So I was taken aback by your story because I'm coming into surrogacy, like I said earlier, everyone comes with a story. But I honestly think for me, out of all the stories I've heard, and I've heard a lot of stories, having had experienced 8 miscarriages previously, that number just kind of, I read it several times and thought about that. Can you start by sharing with the group what your experiences were with you and your husband coming into that brought you to surrogacy?
Yeah, so, just first of all, miscarriage wasn't something I thought about really. I mean, in my family, people seem to be able to have children. And so this wasn't top of mind for me. When my husband and I, about 2 years into our marriage, had decided that we were ready to become parents, we're excited to take our, build our family. And so we went on this amazing, romantic trip, and it was like perfect setting. And we were like, this is it. I love you more. Let's have babies. And so once we made that decision, like 2 months afterwards, we found out that we were expecting, and we were kind of like, yeah, okay, wow, that
worked out really well, right?
Good, yeah, like all right, and so about, I want to say about 6 to 7 weeks into that pregnancy, I had a miscarriage, and I was disappointed. But after talking to the doctor and saying, this is very common, you're young, don't let this, mean anything for you, try again when you're ready, and so I didn't think much of it other than like, what, this is your body telling you that this is not a viable pregnancy, we'll move on. And so a couple of months later, we found ourselves pregnant again. And so we were very cautiously optimistic, but more on the optimistic side. And I'd say probably about 8 weeks into that pregnancy, found out that I was having a miscarriage. And what was unfortunate about this is that we had traveled to London to visit friends of ours who had just shared with us that they were expecting. And obviously they had no idea what we were going through. I'm in a hotel in London, and I'm, trying to find pads because I'm like literally, bleeding in like, theater essentially, and trying to keep it secret from our friends who we don't want to be a downer to their amazing news and where they're going and their family. And so that was my second. That one took me a little bit of time to get past. And so we thought maybe there's something going on here. And that's when we started to look into meeting with medical specialists, fertility specialists, to see if there's something that's going on genetically or physiologically that we're unaware of. And pretty much we had all the tests, we had multiple tests done, and it was coming up that genetically we were fine. There was nothing really wrong with me physiologically. And so it was just definitely maybe, you know, bad luck, essentially. And so we tried again and lost that pregnancy roughly around the same time, tried again, lost that pregnancy roughly around the same time. And at this point, now there is a problem, because I did have like very small fibroids, but my doctor said, you know what, they're very small, nothing to really be concerned with. Plenty of women can carry to term with fibroids, but estrogen and hormones feed fibroids. So with every pregnancy, they were getting bigger. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately ended up having a hysteroscopy. I actually had my they went in, I had fibroids that were quite large, removed them, sewed back up, perfect uterus, no scar tissue, everything was great. You know, and so we sort of rectified what could have been part of a challenge. And about a year after that surgery, we opted to try again, and made it about 10 weeks. And so once I passed the 6 week and the 7 week and the 8th week and the 9th, I'm like, okay,
we're on
surgery
to something
works.
here. Right.
We're on to something. This is fantastic. And then ultimately ended up losing that pregnancy as well. And so, you know, and then people ask me, why did you keep trying? Why did you keep, you know, doing this? And the answer is quite simple, is that my husband and I weren't on the same page at this point around alternative means to have your family. Because around the 5th or 6th loss, I started looking into surrogacy, because I started thinking, well, maybe I'm just not the vessel by which we would have our children, and genetically there had been nothing found with our fetuses, so I thought I could still be a biological parent, just maybe not necessarily carry. But my husband was pretty daunted by the cost and sort of just the concept of it, was just very foreign. And you know, he had ethics issues with it. He wanted to understand like who these women were, why were they doing it, is anyone being taken advantage of in this process? And so he had a lot of concerns that were more, you know, actually very thoughtful and caring, as well as financial. And so I said, okay, well, if we're not going to do this, then I'll keep trying. And hopefully, because no one's told me why we couldn't, so I would keep trying. And ultimately, my husband, you know, sort of turned to me and said, I can't keep doing this with you. And because it was taking a toll on me emotionally, mentally, physically, and so I sort of came to a decision. I said, listen, how about we do this? While you figure out how you feel about this, how about we sort of freeze time and freeze embryos? Mm-hmm. And that will give you some time to think it through, maybe give us some time to feel like we're building up a good nest egg to financially afford it without any sense of anxiety. And so that's what we did. And that was
pause. You create embryos, and then you took an emotional pause.
Yeah. So I figured, you know, I said, you know, obviously I know you want more time, but we don't really have that. I'm 38 at this point. We started at 32. Now I'm at age 38. And I said, let's freeze with my 38-year-old embryos rather than wait till my potentially 40 or whatever, you know, when you get to that point. We were comfortable. And so we did that. And in the meantime, we were looking to buy our first brownstone. And funny story with that is that we narrowed down to 2. and one was like completely tricked out, completely renovated, and then one was like a slight fixer-upper, but it was on a much nicer street. It was wide, and it had like a lot of the sort of things you think about when you think about a classic brownstone in Brooklyn. And so we were trying to make the decision. He's like, I don't know, I just really, really love this particular fixer-upper. And I said, really? I really thought that you would like the new one. And he said, yeah, no, there's something about this. He said, I don't know, like, I can just see us raising a family in this house. I was like, well, then where do I sign up? What do I need to sign? Like, we're getting this
get us on that track. Let's go. Let's keep going. Right.
Yeah. And so, but what was interesting is there was a room that I sort of picked out in the brownstone that I felt like was the perfect nursery in my head. And so as we had just decorated the entire place, like we are very much into interior decorating. So we decorated the place to the nines, and we were getting ready to plan sort of our 10-year wedding anniversary, as well as like our housewarming with our friends and family. And the only room we hadn't decorated was that one room that I was sort of reserving in my mind as the nursery. And not that my husband didn't try. He's like, well, what about? I'm like, nope, no. And so we found out that I was expecting. This was the 8th pregnancy, and it kind of felt like serendipitous. Like we were in the house we were meant to have to build our family. We were about to have a party to celebrate 10 years together, and our friends and our closest friends and family were going to be at this place, and it would have happened right around the end of the first trimester. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the stars are all aligning perfectly. This is going to be it. And we're going to get to share this amazing moment with our family. And so right around, I want to say 13 weeks, I was getting ready to be dismissed from the fertility clinic. Like, you are clearly now over to an OBGYN, last sonogram. And the classic sort of someone comes over and quietly does your sonogram, and then the practitioner gets a little quiet, leaves the room, and that's never a good sign. And at some point they could not get a heartbeat, and so the pregnancy was no longer, and this is about a week before our celebration, and that we were planning to share with our families. And this is 2 years too post the sort of freezing time moment. And so I finally said to my husband, after all that, we went through it. We had the party, didn't say anything to family that was going on. As a matter of fact, most of our families didn't know beyond around the 5th or 6th loss, whenever we would lose. We kept that to ourselves. And so that's when I said, I think we have to have the conversation about gestational surrogacy. Mm-hmm. And he was getting ready to do a startup. He founded a startup, and he was like, well, okay, if I'll start my venture, we'll move down this path, and if we go broke from either or both, then so be it.
So he finally got on board with the plan. I like how you pointed out how you weren't on the same emotional page, because I think emotional readiness is different for everyone, and then often can be different within a couple, right? I think that it takes, sometimes one person is quicker to get there emotionally than the other, and you can't move forward with one person and not the other, right? So it sounds like at that point your husband just said, well, we're going to take 2 potential risks, right? But also could potentially lead us to greatness, hopefully on both parts, right? So I'm glad that you got there after all those steps and challenges that you faced along the way, because I think for everyone it's different. Everyone that I talk to has a different emotional threshold. For some people, maybe it's 1 miscarriage or 2 miscarriages. When I read 8, I just said, oh my God, this amazing, strong woman to keep, because especially when you don't have complete answers in terms of what works, what doesn't work. And obviously, as Leah pointed out before, nothing is a guarantee, even surrogacy, right? So you're entering another kind of unknown process in that respect. So can you talk a little bit about those first steps into the world of surrogacy and what it was like to match with Sarah?
Yeah. So, it's so funny that you mentioned that. We did go into this with a level of skepticism, because we had not received any answers about our challenges.
Right.
And so we did not know whether or not this would work. Like, would our surrogate experience the same, level of miscarriage that we did? And so it was an expensive experiment to test out. And so as we were embarking on that journey, I didn't work. So just to sort of piggyback on a couple of things that Lee had mentioned. So obviously I'm living in New York. The clinic that was working with us from a fertility standpoint, when we made the transition, once we determined that we were not going to be doing IVF for ourselves with our frozen embryos, and we're actually going to be transferring them into a carrier, they're like, okay, so this is where our relationship ends. And this is when I learned about the laws in New York. Like, it didn't occur to me that New York would be one of those states where it was banned.
Right.
And so I thought, okay. And they said, but we have a lot of patients like you, and we have a sister clinic in New Jersey where it is legal, and we can refer you to that clinic. And so that's what I ended up doing, is partnering with this clinic in New Jersey. And because so many New York families went there for that very reason, they actually had their own, similar to Circle have a surrogacy practice as part of their offerings as well. And so, but they don't match you. They do all the other stuff after you find your own match. So I did go and do the sort of thing where I found my own surrogate, and got really, really lucky with Sarah. And they lived in Ohio. I liked that in Ohio they had a pre-birth order, and so we could make sure that we were going to be on the birth certificate as our child's biological parents from the very beginning. And so, as for those of you who don't know, in certain states, while some permit gestational carrier, you still might have to petition the courts and adopt your own biological child. So you have to be mindful of where the surrogate lives, and obviously agencies like Circle would sort of guide you in which direction for those things to be mindful of. But in doing my own research, I discovered which states seem to be a bit safer to partner with for us. And then we also had to we were thinking about, well, where would we be able to get to fairly fast? Like, which states could we fly to fairly easily? I wanted to be within about a 2.5-hour flight from New York. So that sort of also grounded us in terms of where we were looking. And so that was a sort of my process, like, where do I want them to live? What are my options? What states are most surrogacy or intended parent friendly? And so that factored into a lot of the decisions around how we landed on Sarah, and she happened to live in Ohio. And so that's how we landed there. And we had multiple conversations, and I don't know if Leah mentioned this a little bit, but it is a little bit strange. I mean, you do feel sort of like you're like dating, like, what's your favorite color? What do you love? What are your hobbies? It's like, it's such a strange thing as you're trying to build a connection or see if there's some natural affinity that you would have with this person who's going to be doing something so intimate and so special and amazing for you and your family. So, what does that feel like? What does that look like? And you don't really know until you know. And so that was sort of, what I gleaned from this is I did talk to multiple people, and you just kind of, like, some people you click with and some people you don't, just like in any relationship, whether it be professional or personal. And that's what I found in this process too. And with Sarah and her husband, Matt, we just clicked. And so that was how we got to that piece of it. You're on mute, Jen.
Sorry, I had some background noise. I wanted to make sure no one was listening to my dog bark. You're in IVF, and so you're matched with Sarah, and you're moving into the part of trying to get her pregnant. Now, for you guys, you spend so much time here in this phase and those initial parts of pregnancy. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to go through that with Sarah, and at what point were you able to kind of feel more comfortable and relaxed?
Oh, you don't feel more comfortable and relaxed until that baby is in your arms. Like that's just, let's just be, what was special about Sarah is that there's just something incredibly kind and thoughtful and pragmatic. And I'm a naturally high anxiety, high energy person. And so she was a very calming presence for me, and type of person that really balanced out my energy, similar to how my husband does too. He's a much more pragmatic, thoughtful, person, and I'm like, let's go, let's do this. And so that factored into it as well. And what we would do with the agency that we partnered with, we had them fly in, they had their test and their blood work, and obviously the counseling, the psychological testing. And so when we were having a conversation with the social worker, or the counselor rather, who conducted and was reviewing her psychological profile, she was like, first of all, I don't know where you found this woman, she said, but it is like, she literally is the perfect blend of pragmatic and altruistic. Like, she's just exactly the type of person that is meant to do something like this, understanding exactly her role, invested enough emotionally in it, but not overly invested. Understands like what her job is in this, and what that partnership looks like. So it was so amazing to know that I found someone like that. And then when we had our couples counseling and then our group counseling to sort of talk about fears, concerns that either party had, and we're able to sort of talk it out, in that environment, was so helpful and so cathartic, which was obviously what it was meant to be. So it just, there's like really funny things, like my husband joked about, whether Sarah, would eat peanut butter, because he was really definitely afraid that our child would have like a peanut allergy. And we're like, we don't think it works that way, but, and so we're just being really funny about it. But it's like stuff like that, like conversations about diet, what if the intended parents are vegetarians or vegans or vice versa, and what's your comfort level, and how to, and where's your role, and how much do you play a role into things that you wouldn't normally think about because you would be the person normally doing it.
And how do you trust someone to do things, even if it's different than the way you would do it, being able to trust that they're doing the right thing by your child.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It was like, I didn't even think that this, it was like illuminating to even have those sort of conversations. But yeah, so that's the sort of beginning of it.
The beginning of your relationship.
And she was young and healthy and was a great fit.
And did she get pregnant on the first transfer?
Yeah, and that's actually a somewhat funny story, similar to what Dr. Brauer was sort of alluding to earlier in terms of how many embryos that you would put in. And so I wanted to put in 2 because I thought, I was thinking that sort of mindset of like back up in case one doesn't take, maybe the other one will take. And my husband was like, no. I do not want a chance of twins. We're gonna put in 1. And I'm like, no, but our history or whatever. And Sarah was open to carrying up to 2. And the doctor guided us in the same way that Dr. Brauer explained earlier in the conversation about the health and viability. And we had our embryo that we were talking about was a AA embryo, and so very healthy, all the right markers. And so we ultimately decided on 1. And so it was like transfer day. It was like April, and it was right around my birthday actually. And Sarah and I and her were in the sort of room together. Her husband was there with her too. And I'll never forget that moment of holding, her arm and looking at the screen as they're doing the transfer of the embryo to her and seeing that little light. And if anyone knows about that experience, it's like kind of like awe-inspiring and amazing. And at that point, after it was done, I let myself sort of feel that the immense, like the years of this moment coming to fruition and what this could mean for us, and like just broke down in tears. And Sarah just gave me the biggest hug, and then scurried off because she had to go to the bathroom because she had to have a full bladder. And so scurried off immediately after that. But we had such a great hug in a moment, and I was able to finally feel all the emotion of almost 10 years that led up into that point. And all the loss that led up to that moment, and the possibilities of that moment. And a few weeks later, blood tests confirmed that she was pregnant, and so we were excited, but pregnancy was never a guarantee for us.
Right.
And so we were happy, but not necessarily overly joyful. It was sort of like, okay, now here we go. The countdown begins. And we didn't tell our families what we were doing. And so that was something interesting. Like, I talked to my mother all the time, and she would call me and I would like hang up the phone. I'd be like, how are you? You're good? You're good? Great, great. I can't talk to you right now because I was so afraid I would spill the beans, but we committed that we would keep this to ourselves.
So you're holding all that information and things are looking more positive as you progress. And then at what point, and I'm sorry, I don't want to cut your story short, but I'm looking at time and I just want to make sure we have time to talk to Angela as well.
Oh, yeah.
But what was it like for you? At what point did you relax? And you say not your baby was born, but at what point did you share? Did you wait until your baby was born to share with your family? Or was it at some point during the pregnancy, did that shift?
So I would say about 7 months into the pregnancy, I at one point turned to my husband. I said, "Do you think we should tell our families?"
Our daughter's gonna be here in 2 months. Countdown's on.
Yeah, we're gonna have a baby. And so that was really the moment we started to share with our parents and our siblings, you know, what we were doing, where we were in the journey. And my mom immediately said, "I want to meet this person who's doing this for my daughter." And so we arranged for her to come up with us into Ohio, and Sarah's parents were coming back from a trip. And so we met at a restaurant at some mall in Ohio, outside of Columbus, Ohio, and had the most amazing time with meeting her parents and my mom meeting her and her husband. And it was just the most amazing, fun afternoon to have our families connect in that way.
I love it. I can't imagine how good that must have felt for all of them to be brought in. So I want to fast forward a little bit to Pearl's birth, if that's okay. Can you talk about what it felt like to finally get to that finish line after all these years, all this time, all this love, all this energy, all this emotion? What was that finally like for you guys to welcome Pearl into this world?
I can't begin to describe the emotion of that. You know, we flew when we were fortunate, like Leah, we were fortunate that we flew in time to see Pearl's birth and experience Pearl's birth. We weren't as proactive as Leah in getting it there a week in advance, but we got there same day. And Sarah actually spoke with the hospital, and they made sure that she didn't get anything that would sort of progress the contractions. She said, "I'm going to wait and give her parents time to get here." And so that worked, and we got there and we spent some time together in the room. And then all of a sudden, when she was fully dilated, my husband left the room, her father left the room. And so it was just me, her husband, Matt, and her mom, Cindy, in the room. And I was kind of off to the side, and Cindy was positioned next to Sarah's left knee, and her husband was holding her hand, and the doctor obviously is positioned in the front. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And so at one point, Cindy, Sarah's mom, looked over and she goes, "Cynara, come over here. This is your baby." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't realize, didn't know. And I walked around and I held Sarah's other knee, and watched Pearl get pushed into this world. And it was amazing. It was phenomenal. She was perfect. And they rushed to get her cleaned up. Nurses and doctors took care of Sarah. And then I finally got to feel her. That's the one thing that's just something that you can't get, right? Is that period of being pregnant with your own child. And so I finally could feel her heart, and I could feel her skin. I could smell her. And it was just the most incredible experience. And I will never forget. I remember looking at Sarah and just thinking, "Thank you so much for this." So yeah, that's my story.
Such a beautiful story. Such a beautiful story. And her name, and your daughter's name is Pearl, and she's 4 now, right? Is that right? She's
Yes.
4. I mean, just amazing. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us. It's such a powerful story, and I hope that it provides those here with hope, right? Of just knowing that even after you've had such challenges, that it is still possible to welcome a little one into this world. So thank you. I'm gonna transition now to our last speaker, which is Angela. Thank you so much, Cynara. Angela, are you there?
I am. I'm coming on.
Hi. Thank you for joining us. Sorry, I know we're running late. but I want you to have time to share your story. You and I have some similarities that we learned when we talked, is that we're both came to surrogacy due to a cancer diagnosis. I think that's a group of people that often do need the support from surrogates to get here. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you to surrogacy and what that experience was like?
Sure. So my surrogacy journey started over a decade ago. In 2007, I was having abdominal pain and I wound up having a surgery that left me, well, post-op, I was diagnosed after, pathology was run with appendiceal cancer, which is a very rare cancer. And I also, when I came out of surgery, had lost one embryo. So at that point, we were trying to figure out what the next steps in my treatment were. We wound up landing with a physician at Memorial Sloan Kettering who wanted me to have intraperitoneal chemotherapy, but highly, highly, highly recommended doing fertility preservation. At that point, I was 30 years old. I was engaged. Our wedding, the wedding to my husband, my now husband, was 4 months away, and we were not at all thinking about family. We were just thinking about our wedding and kind of this wallop that we just experienced. But it was really our medical oncologist, or my medical oncologist, who highly suggested that we preserve fertility, since I did have one ovary left. And she said, after chemotherapy, we're really not so sure what's going to happen. And then fast forward, I needed a second operation in 2011. We did preserve fertility. We did by induct freezing 6 embryos. And then in 2011, I wound up having a second operation, it was even a more radical operation. We flew out of state for it. And at that point, I lost my other ovary and my uterus. So by 2011, I think we had wrapped our head around the fact that it was unlikely I was going to carry. But after that second surgery, it was apparent I was not going to carry, but we always had those 6 embryos essentially as our backup plan. And we just didn't know when exactly it was going to be that we pulled the trigger. Because, as you know, when you're going through a cancer journey, starting a family isn't really at top of mind. So it was difficult. It was tricky. Our timing, it was very different, I think, than many people who had experienced trouble maintaining pregnancy or miscarriage, because we kind of always knew that we were going to wind up there. It wasn't until, probably 2012, after some couples counseling and I think just trying to digest what the past what had happened in our past, that we recognized, now it was time that we try to start our family. And that's really how we wound up going the surrogacy route.
Got it. So you've had a health crisis and you're faced with, then how do we then move forward and build our family after experiencing something like that? I definitely know it all too well. Can you talk about your first steps into the world of surrogacy and what that was like to move forward, to connect with your carrier?
Sure. So what we did was we had these embryos frozen in 2007, and the physician's office that we used did have a agency that they recommended. So back in 2007, we did meet with them initially just to understand, okay, when it is time to, if and when we go surrogacy, what would this look like? What would this cost? What is your process like? And we stayed in touch with them for, I would say, every year to year and a half. We would just touch base, say we're not really there yet. And when it was time to actually find a surrogate, we initiated the process, and we told, it starts, I think, very similarly in most agencies, where you discuss what it is that you're looking for in a surrogate. For us, it was someone that was very communicative, someone that I think my husband and I both respond very well to warmth, but we were pretty open in terms of what it was that we were looking for. We didn't really have any major restrictions on who it is that we would have wanted to work with.
So you knew what you were looking for, and you felt open to what was going to come into your life. And so talk a little bit about, how did you know it was the right fit when you connected with her?
It's so funny. I've spoken to many women who are, considering surrogacy or starting down the path. And, you know, as you know, it's quite daunting. It's really, really, really overwhelming, so, which is why I like, you know, speaking, because people have been through this. It does, there are happy endings. There are many, many happy endings. I'm sorry, what was the question initially? I apologize.
What it was like for you to connect.
Oh, the right thing, right. So I've spoken to many women about surrogacy, and that question comes up often, and I do feel like I don't necessarily know if there's a moment where you recognize someone is your right fit, or if you feel like you mesh, you get along well, and then I think there's just a whole element of faith, you know, going on this. You know, this is a stranger, so you know, one thing that I can say, and that gives me a lot of joy, is recognizing that the women who come to be surrogates do it from a sense of altruism. You know, initially I remember my husband thinking, you know, I think these people might just want to do this for the money, and that's absolutely has not at all been my experience. And I think for the most part, surrogates, they have tremendous hearts. So
it's a misconception that people often have, that they're just here.
And it wasn't true. It's so interesting just going through the whole process. I don't even think that you don't even think about that, because these women are just so giving of themselves. But yeah, so we wound up matching with a carrier in Texas whose name was Rochelle. Rochelle, she's great. You know, she was younger than I, and I often speak of the fact that Rochelle and our paths would have never crossed in our regular lives, because we're very, very different people, but she's our angel. We still consider her our family angel. So.
I love that. Right. This brought you together, and it probably wouldn't have been in any other circumstance, right? But this together brought you there. You ran into some struggles during this first leg part of your surrogacy journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what we did, well, before we matched with Rochelle, we had matched with a couple of other potential surrogates. Unlike Circle, a lot of the pre-screening, the agency that we worked with did not do a lot of pre-screening prior to the match. Once we matched, we screened kind of concurrently in a way. So because of that, we had matched with somebody prior to matching with Rochelle, who screened. Everything was going very well. We even had our appointment on the books, and we purchased a flight for her. I can't even recall what state she was going to be coming in from. And about a week before, she did essentially drop out on us, and it was left a little bit questionable as to why. And it was I don't know if I'd use the word devastating, but it was certainly heartbreaking, because you have so much invested at this point. You think like, okay, I'm here, I'm ready to meet the person who is going to go on this journey with me. And for that to happen was challenging. It was difficult for sure. Then again, though, you know, you always try to comfort yourself with thinking this was not meant to be. If this is a person that couldn't carry through with these first initial steps, how are you going to make it through a 9-month, you know, pregnancy with this person? So it wasn't long after that we matched with Rochelle, and things went really great. When we met her, it was a very nice chemistry between her then partner and my husband and I. The four of us got along quite nicely, very easy to speak with. Very different culturally to some degree. They were from Texas, and they were just interesting. And then when we've had 6 embryos frozen. We did not genetically test any of them. One, because we really didn't, there was no option to go forward to collect anymore, because I was on such an IVF timeframe and we were trying to do chemotherapeutics, and 2, it just wasn't that popular at the time. I don't think the medicine was really where it is now. Mm-hmm. So when we did we transferred 2 at a time, again, I think the medicine was, the thinking was a little bit different. I don't think there was, the science really didn't bear out yet, or at least the IVF physicians weren't more determined to do single embryo transfers at the time. So the first set of embryos that we transferred, we were told, I think within about 48-hour mark, that she was pregnant, only to find out 24 hours later that she was not. So essentially, they call that a chemical pregnancy. I don't know if it really falls underneath the miscarriage umbrella, but that was very, very devastating, because I think you go through so much work to get there, and to then find out that she's pregnant and she's not was really, it was hard. And it was very hard on us, because we felt like we were holding our breaths for so long, but it was also very hard on her, on our surrogate, which I did not really recognize until it was a girlfriend who was already a mother who asked me, well, how is Rochelle doing with this? And I was taken aback. I said, you're right. I really haven't considered her feelings at all. And it was hard for her. I think many surrogates, they plan on going into this and delivering to you a healthy child. And when it doesn't work out for whatever reason, it's really hard for them too, because like, we said, they're in this to assist. They're in this for truly altruistic reasons. So when it doesn't work out, it's hard for them also. So then
that is consideration, because they're so caught up in their own loss and their own emotion. And then it's hard to then have to also, like Leah was saying, to care for someone else and to make sure that they're okay during that time. Now, at some point you ran out of embryos, right, and you needed to then transition into considering an egg donor. Can you talk about what that transition was like for you?
So when we did a secondary transfer to Rochelle, and we did have my first son, Caden, who's now 6.5, a little over 6.5. And then we were going to, we knew we wanted a sibling for Caden. We still had 2 embryos frozen. We kind of thought, okay, this is it. We had Rochelle on the line again. She was willing to carry again. We implanted them. They took, but at around the 7 or 8 week mark, she miscarried. And that was, that was actually very, very traumatic for her. At that time, we parted ways with Rochelle, not personally, we're still in touch with her, but, we did not want to go through another journey with her. I think it had been, I think, too much. I wouldn't have felt good doing that. So we needed some time to recoup and some time to consider, okay, well, what are our options? So one option really would have been adoption, which I think would have been very hard to change lanes. So our other option, which again was always in the back of our heads because we knew we had a finite number of embryos, was to do egg donation or to go with an egg donor. At this point, we had changed IVF offices, and they had a donor egg bank. And what I liked about their egg bank was the nurse that ran it actually met and vetted all of the egg donors herself. So she had a very good sense of personality. But for us, I think from an emotional standpoint, it's funny, I'll be perfectly honest with you, there's still the egg donor, I should mention, we obviously have our second son via egg donor, and it was carried via a second surrogate named Leslie. But there are still times that it is still hard for me in some ways to wrap my head around the fact that my son was born of an egg donor. He is most certainly my son. I adore him and he's wonderful and he's family, but it's an interesting transition to make. That being said, I think it helped that we had a lot of time to think about it, and I think it's a process.
You had already gone the surrogacy route. You knew what to expect, in some, you had your first child and you had going into it, transitioning with Rochelle into the second sibling journey. And then at that point, you're kind of making some transitions, right? And adding an egg donor into the equation. What was it like for you to transition to another surrogate?
So that process, it actually, I think because we had been through it before and because we had our hands full with a toddler, it was actually a little bit easier. At that point, you have better faith in the process, right? Like, we've been there, we know that this works, we already have our son, we assume it's going to work again, albeit with a little bit more people at the party this time around because we needed an egg donor and now another surrogate. What was interesting, though, was Leslie, our second egg donor, was enough almost complete opposites in terms of maybe in terms of personality per se, but such a lovely, lovely woman. It was wonderful working with her. And I will say this, and I think this is somewhat typical too of people who have second children and second pregnancies, from what I understand, is that you almost because your plate is so full with having one child and a career and a marriage and whatever else, whatever other balls you're holding up or carrying or keeping in the air, that it's a little bit more autopilot, if that makes sense. It was a little bit less top of mind per se. So in that sense, it was a bit easier. But still, it was wonderful. It was they were both fantastic experiences, I have to say. I love both of our carriers. We're in touch with both of them. They're just really wonderful women.
You're still in contact with both of them,
Oh, yeah.
even so you have one son who's 6.5 and one who's 3, and you're still in contact with these two ladies that brought them into the world. That's
absolutely.
I know. Similarly, I can't imagine not having that connection after. I think people are often curious about what that relationship looks like. Can you just talk a little bit about, how do you stay in contact? Is it?
Sure. So certainly Christmas cards and things like that. And it really is more, how sometimes people just come into your mind and you think of them? It's more like that, where I'll text them here and there just to say, hello, I've been thinking of you. Rochelle, actually, we've seen both of them. They've both seen my children. Rochelle, we saw a couple of years ago. So my son was 4 and, walking and speaking, and they had a really, really wonderful connection. She came to visit and had dinner at our house with her now fiance. And then Leslie, we were near her home on a trip. So we stopped at a restaurant and we met up with her and her family. That she has a lovely family. So it's, again, I don't think surrogacy is something that any potential mother ever dreams of doing, but when all is said and done, you realize how blessed we are and how much love it took and how much effort it took to bring your children into this world is really quite a beautiful thing. It's really very reassuring about the goodness of humanity, if you will, to take it to a whole other level. But it's a beautiful relationship. I can't thank these women enough. I can't have any more gratitude for them,
Yeah. You and I share that sentiment of just, it teaches our children about there being good in this world and that people, they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the help of others.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good place to end this conversation, because I think we should all take away, especially at this challenging time in a lot of our lives, that the humanity in this process is what binds us all, right? And and makes this possible. So thank you, Angela, so much for sharing your story about the birth of your boys. It's nice to meet you and to share our stories together. I'm going to switch over to the Q&A portion of this program. We have just a few questions. I know we're running late here tonight. So I'm going to transition and just ask a few questions. It looks like a couple of them are medical questions. So Dr. Brauer, are you available to chime back in? Are you there?
Hi, I'm here. I'm just pulling up my camera.
No worries. Thank you. Hi.
It's a little darker in here now, so sorry about the light.
I know it's getting a little late. So we just have a few questions, and so most of them are medical questions for you. So the first question is, do thyroid/prolactin disorders affect fertility?
Yeah, so they can. And it definitely kind of depends what your levels are. So the way that thyroid and prolactin usually affects fertility is ovulation, because the hormones that I talked about, the FSH and the LH, are actually made in the same part of your brain that TSH is. TSH is the hormone that your brain makes to tell your thyroid to make thyroid hormone. And prolactin is actually found in that same area as well. So that's why if there's derangements in the TSH and the prolactin, which those are also interrelated, by the way, if you have an underactive thyroid, we see oftentimes that that's also related to an elevated prolactin. So it can affect ovulation. We know that an elevated TSH or hypothyroidism can also lead to an increased risk of miscarriage. So we really recommend that you kind of aggressively treat that. So I would talk to your doctor about your levels. Both are pretty easy to treat, but they can affect pregnancy, yes, and fertility.
Thank you. Another question is, how long do the egg and sperm survive outside of the human body?
So Sperm, I mean, it depends on if it's been treated or not. So, if it hasn't been treated, we ask the people, get sperm into a lab like within an hour, hour and a half. I mean, if it was 2 hours, I'm sure it would be okay. Once it's washed in media, it can sit for probably up to 5 or 6 hours and still be viable. The egg is a little bit trickier because we never like keep it outside of the body, like not in an incubator. So I would imagine a few hours for an egg.
So this has to happen pretty quickly when you're doing fertilization and.
Well, that's different. I guess I didn't understand the question. So if you have an egg in an incubator, for example, like when we retrieve an egg, usually we keep it in culture for 2 hours before you, for example, if you're freezing eggs, it also depends on what time you're triggered and how many hours after trigger, but that's a whole other thing. But usually within 2 or 3 hours after retrieval, you strip them and freeze them if you're freezing eggs. And ICSI happens usually about 4 hours after retrieval. So if that's the question, we don't leave them like hanging around, longer than that.
Well, it's a good thing you mentioned ICSI, because the next question is about that, because you mentioned earlier about kind of 2 ways to fertilize an egg, just kind of letting it sit and sperm kind of going at it naturally, doing its thing, versus ICSI. Is there one that's safer than the other? This person notes that seems like piercing an egg could potentially damage it.
Yeah, so I wouldn't, so it's not that one is safer than the other. It just matters, like which technology you need. So obviously our goal, is success. And if there is a very low sperm count or motility, et cetera, then we would recommend ICSI. My view on like anything we do is less is more, right? So as a fertility physician, if I can get someone pregnant without IVF, I would much prefer it. If they need IVF, if I can do, conventional or natural insemination, I would much prefer it. But if they require ICSI because there's a significant male factor there, or they're doing genetic testing where it could affect the outcome, then I definitely would do ICSI. And I have to say that fertilization rates with ICSI, I mean, depending if the sperm is, if you compare like conventional insemination fertilization rates to ICSI fertility rates, if the sperm is totally normal, they're going to be pretty similar. Depending on who's doing the ICSI could be higher. So for example, our director of embryology, George Rosas, who's been doing this for like a million years, has like a near 100% fertilization rate with his ICSI technique. But if there's a sperm issue, overall, if you look at fertilization rates, ICSI fertilization rates are a little bit lower, but that's because most people are doing ICSI because there's an issue with the sperm. We have not seen that the piercing, all of this is like such micro manipulation that we have not seen that actually piercing an egg, damages it in any way. There is some controversy surrounding ICSI. So, there's a paper that I always talk to my patients about that was published in 2012 in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that there's a slightly higher anomaly rate for babies born from ICSI. It was like 1.3%, somewhere around that, than babies born without ICSI. But if you look at and people often cite that as a reason not to do ICSI. But if you look at the article closer, you'll see that people who had male factor infertility but got pregnant without ICSI had the same anomaly rate, right? So it's very hard to tease out, is it the technology or is it the fact that you're trying to create a fertilization with a sperm that wasn't meant to fertilize? So if you look at studies using ICSI of totally normal sperm, you won't see that same, anomaly rate. So we do consider it safe. However, if we can get away without it, I would prefer it.
Got it.
Just like
Got it.
technology.
So someone asked if they have embryos frozen. You mentioned earlier about FDA testing, STD testing required of the egg provider, sperm provider within a certain period of time from the retrieval. Are these embryos still able to be used for surrogacy if that testing hadn't been done?
They can be used. Your FDA testing will be done after the fact, outside of that timeline. So your carrier will have to sign a waiver. And this happens a lot. Like this happens, with patients who patients come to surrogacy like from all different directions. Sometimes they don't know when they make the embryos that they're going to need a surrogate. Maybe they have recurrent losses, or maybe they have a traumatic birth and lose their uterus and need to do it later on. So this happens all the time. I've never had a surrogate have a problem, signing a waiver. So they just have to, ideally you want to do it within that timeline. If not, you can do it later and the surrogate will sign a waiver that they weren't tested at the time of creation.
Got it. And so can you speak a little bit to how much does it cost to freeze embryos? I don't know if you could speak to here versus in other locations.
Yeah.
They asked about costs compared here compared to other states.
Yeah. So, every clinic is different, and every clinic has different costs, and a lot of it depends on, if you're doing genetic testing, if you're not doing genetic testing, are you doing FDA screening, or are you not doing FDA screening? So it can cost anywhere from like, 10,500, up to 15,000 or so. And it also depends on if you're doing, a shared risk program, which is a little bit more expensive, but that's kind of the guarantee program. And that pricing is tiered based on age. And so, if you have specific questions about costs, I definitely, when you have a consult, you can always talk to a financial counselor, because there's definitely a range there. And it depends on kind of exactly what you need and what you're planning on using the embryos for, and if you're genetically testing them or not.
Got it. Can you speak a little bit about the question regarding using a frozen versus a fresh donor egg?
Sure. So there's two
Is there an
ways
issue with using frozen as opposed to fresh?
Yeah. So there's Circle has a fresh donor database. SGF also has a fresh donor database. By the way, you can use donors from either database and apply and do shared risk. We will let you bring in fresh donors from an agency if that's what you're looking for. So there's two ways to do donor egg, right? There's fresh versus frozen. I don't know how Circle does it, but at SGF, if you're doing fresh, you have 3 different options. You can do a 1-to-1, so one recipient for one donor. You can do a 1-to-2, which is one donor for 2 recipients, or a 1-to-3, which is one donor to 3 recipients. Obviously, there's different costs involved in each of those. Or you can do a frozen donor egg bank. The plus with a frozen donor egg bank is that there's like very minimal downtime, right? I mean, it's medically, it's like one of the easiest things you could do, because you order the eggs, you have them shipped, we thaw the eggs, we fertilize them with sperm, we make embryos, we put them back in the freezer if you're using them for a surrogate, or we can put them back, in fresh, like as a fresh embryo. So there's very little downtime to that. The other plus to using frozen is that there's very little cancellation rate. When I say cancellation rate, I mean you could be matched with a fresh donor, and get that whole process going, and then about 8 to 10% of the time there's a cancellation rate, because let's say the donor flakes out, or let's say the donor has a family emergency, or she gets sick, or whatever it is. So that's never going to happen to your frozens, right? Because you bought the eggs and they're already retrieved. The plus of the fresh is really, well, if you're using like Circle or using our database, like they're both pretty robust, so there's not that much downtime. It's not like, we recruit donors in 8 different regions. So a lot of New York programs, like they're only recruiting in New York, which it's really hard to recruit donors in New York. So there's like an 8 to 12 month, waiting list. With us, it's like more like 6 to 8 weeks, because we're recruiting all over the place. So it's not, the timing is not as much of an issue with us as some places. The plus to me with the fresh is really a numbers game, because, for example, if you're using 1-to-1, whatever eggs she makes are yours, whether it's 10 or 12 or 20 or whatever. If you're doing a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3, you're guaranteed to get at least 6 to 8 eggs. But if you're doing a 1-to-2, most people get more than that, right? They get on average around 10 eggs, and the price of that is the same price as a frozen. So it kind of depends on where you go. Yeah. So, but there's a little, it is a numbers game. So the success rate's a little bit better, with the fresh, because you're getting more numbers for your money.
Got it. Thank you. I'm going to chime in Dean to answer the rest of these questions. I think he can tackle for us.
Hello.
Hi, Dean.
Come on.
Hi.
Well, it's dark.
It's
It's dark in
in
here.
your room too. It's telling us that we're on too long. Couple of quick questions here. When you bring your own surrogate into the process, can they use their own health insurance for IVF as well?
So can the surrogates insurance be used for IVF? I mean, so first off, whether you use a surrogate that you find or you use with an agency, you're going to want someone with experience to review her policy, just because you want to make sure that she has maternity coverages for the pregnancy. Most likely, you can't use her insurance for the IVF, potentially maybe some of the testing, the blood testing, et cetera, but IVF coverage to begin with is very limited throughout the country, and then trying to use it when it's not technically for her own infertility. I mean, I could almost nearly guarantee that no, you couldn't use it for the IVF, but possibly maybe some of the initial blood testing and things like that that are done at the clinic.
Got it. And kind of a similar question asked by the same attendee. In July this year, New York IVF mandate law takes effect with medical insurance. How does this work for gestational surrogacy?
Yeah, so again, as Dr. Brauer talked about earlier, there may be some coverage for the intended parents portion of the IVF and the egg retrieval, potentially the embryo creation, blood work for the intended mother and intended father. It depends too. I mean, it's only, I believe, for plans that, non-ERISA plans, so non-company benefit packages that are in-house in a sense for large corporations. So it's usually just private health insurance, and they still will allow certain limitations on it. That even Massachusetts has had IVF cover for a long time, but there's still specific things that they can exclude. Like I know some plans in Massachusetts where a woman using a donor to create embryos for her own use would be covered, but on the flip side, if she used a donor to create them for surrogacy, it wouldn't be covered. So there's little intricacies. So you obviously want to review your policy as close as possible to see what you may have coverage for and whatnot. And I know clinics like Dr. Brauer's will have a financial team there that has gone through this process, and they'll be able to, they may have seen your plan prior and understand what's covered and what's not.
I'll say just quickly, Dean, I'll just jump in. I would say, generally speaking, the insurance element around surrogacy in particular tends to be one of the more complicated elements of any journey, and certainly an element that has an incredible amount of variability with regard to cost, because even if the surrogate has insurance that is approved for her maternity care during the journey, there's always a potential that it gets denied retroactively, which we've seen happen. And so for Circle specifically as an agency, we've just moved to a flat fee model where we charge you a flat fee for insurance, and we cover any scenario that's needed as it relates to the journey.
Thank you, Sam. So this last question, which I think is a good note to end on, was surrogacy just legalized in New York last month? Well, yes, it was, which we're all very excited about, all the wonderful things it's going to bring to this field and for our intended parents and surrogates. The only little caveat is it doesn't go into effect until February 2021. So we'll all be getting geared up and ready for that transition to happen. Dean, do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, so it's so just kind of as a little piece, I mean, surrogacy was always legal, but compensated gestational surrogacy, which is what most people do, wasn't, and it was criminalized, and New York was probably the most draconian of all the states in the country in terms of legislation against surrogacy. And part of the reason it took so long is the same people that drafted that legislation to ban surrogacy are still senators and congressmen in New York. So it's been a long time coming. So it's wonderful news. The statute itself is kind of still being reviewed, and there might be some cleanup and some regulations will come from it. But for the most part, yes, you will be able to use gestational surrogates in New York City compensated as of February of 2021. I think we'll start obviously taking requests from surrogates or taking their information so that we're ready in February. Won't be able to match them till after that stage, and they won't be able to screen and go through processes till after that stage, but we'll start finding women who are willing to be surrogates and work through the statute just to make sure we're doing everything exactly as needed under the statute. There is, to get it passed, they did hyper protect gestational surrogates in the bill, so it's a little takes some time to go through it to see how it will impact. But as I mentioned earlier, the giant benefit outside of using a surrogate in New York is that you can use your clinic and your doctors that you love in New York to do transfers and to work with them. They'll probably have to wait until February as well to do transfers, but you won't have to ship your embryos outside of state to work with a surrogate, regardless of where she is. So it, in the very least of things, that's an awesome step forward, because I know we've had lots and lots of parents from New York that used doctors in New York City and New York State that they loved and then couldn't use them for the embryo transfers after.
We're really excited about all the opportunity that it will bring. So we reached the end of our questions for the evening. So thank you very much for joining us and staying so late. And everyone wants to pop on and say a quick goodbye, but thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Brauer. Thank you, Dean and Sam. And ladies, Leah, Cynara, and Angela, you guys are fantastic. Thank you so much for being here.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone, have a great night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.